And a lot of times people, I think, they feel like they're willing to compromise anything. I don't think they really are. Oh, God. What?
We've been muted this whole time. I'm so sorry. Because I had to mute us for the intro when we were eating our food. So let's start all over. I love you. I'm sorry. This was so good.
I'm so mad.
I know, I'm sorry.
I am so fucking mad.
I'm sorry. Audio issues is a problem for me.
Yeah, but how many times have you made the same mistake, babe?
I know, but I'm sorry. Can we just restart? All right, so welcome to CherrySTEM number 32. I will just talk the whole time. You don't have to talk. You're done.
Yeah, I'm done.
I'm sorry. All right, well, I am using a new system and we are downstairs, which is a new setup, okay? And each time I change the setup, I fuck up. Every time. And I should have recorded it, which is something I don't do also, which I should be doing. So I'll start with that. Okay. Welcome to CherrySTEM number 32. Live, love, and get happy. And currently my co-host is very unhappy because I did an oopsie for almost 59 minutes.
That you've done.
No, in the past, we were not streaming to YouTube. We were streaming elsewhere.
Either way, the point is not checking to make sure it's really working.
I did check and it was working. I just didn't check the sound because we had sound, but then there's desktop sound and microphone sound, and I didn't have microphone sound on. And I did an oopsie.
That comes from you constantly moving things around and not using systems.
Yes.
Not doing things consistent.
Yes.
And constantly creating chaos that even you can't handle.
Yes, yes. I create chaos that even I can't handle, and then we have oopsies that suck really bad.
How long?
59 minutes.
Yeah, a fucking hour. My God.
Yeah. God bless those 3 viewers who were here this whole time.
Yes.
Hanging out.
Them, listening to our silence.
Yeah, literally just silence. They probably just walked away and left the page. But anyway, okay. So, welcome to CherrySTEM number 32. Live, love, get happy, and don't have any more oopsies. And would you like to go over some...
Well, one of the things that we're talking about is the prices that you pay. That you
for love.
For love. You pay prices for love. And then you accept, and you move on to acceptance and recognize that, and you take personal responsibility.
I done goofed. I fucked up.
Right. And here's one of those things where I know that she's so goddamn chaotic. Things are constantly going to be spilled. Things are constantly going to be broken. The same mistake is going to be made wasted over and over and over and over. The exact same mistake. And something like that drives me insane. It makes me want to cut my face off. Okay.
Do you know the definition of insanity?
Yes. Yet this is
the
decision that I've made, and so I can't really, you know, be upset about it. I've made this decision. It's part of the price.
You can be upset about it.
Well, okay, I can be upset about it temporarily, but the truth of the matter is I do need to take responsibility for my decision to be with somebody who has all of the benefits that go with all that fucking craziness. Because there are tremendous benefits that I value. And so this is
I take personal responsibility too for my fuck-ups.
There's a perfect example of how you can't have mutually exclusive things, which, I mean, unfortunately, you don't have the context of everything that we've been talking about for the past hour, but this is excellent for an example of exactly what it means to take personal responsibility and recognize that there are mutual exclusivities, because if a person was not carefree, okay, carefree comes with careless. Those things do tend to go together. And when you want to have somebody who is more carefree, you appreciate that, you can't also dislike those things that are careless about them truly. You have to be able to take the good with the bad and recognize that there are things that go together. And there are times that you will try to want in mutual exclusivities. And that's what constantly breaks people apart, is that they want mutual exclusivities. I want somebody who is this and not that. But this and that are two sides of the same coin. They are one thing, and you want this one thing without the other, and basically you're wanting something that doesn't exist in reality. Reality can't work that way. And it's there are these basic ideas of wanting, wanting heaven without putting up with a little bit of hell.
You can't appreciate heaven if you've not been through hell.
Right, exactly. You can't. That's what a spoiled child is when they are given absolutely everything. Everything is nothing to them. It's with the most valuable things on the planet, because they're constantly given to them. They're garbage to them. They're nothing to them. And so the thing is, you just can't. You have to recognize all throughout life there are these things that are mutually exclusive, and there are things that are completely tied together and are one thing. And if you don't pay attention to those, then you're going to constantly be unhappy. You're going to constantly be dissatisfied. And you have to be able to take personal responsibility and say, I decided I do want this and I don't want that. And what we're talking about specifically.
So the context, yes. We're here talking about, so Valentine's Day is coming up, and our podcast is sort of themed that way. And we're talking about Valentine's Day, also known as Singles Awareness Day. And we're going over some information for the singles, and then we're going to have some information for the couples. So we're talking about a series of small studies of middle-aged German adults. And they were looking at the difference between people who are in relationships versus those who are single. And this specifically had to do, there's 3 different types. And this one was people who are currently single. So we're looking at somebody on the outside of a relationship, single, looking at other couples or whatever. And so they found that self-esteem, agreeableness, conscientiousness, neuroticism were no different in people who are currently single versus those who, or physical attractiveness. They were not any different. So it's not that you're more neurotic or less attractive, which is why you're not in a relationship. At least according to middle-aged German adults, there's no difference. So we were talking about how do you reconcile?
Yeah, because these people were just as happy being.
Their self-esteem was the same.
So, so that's
social
the context of what
skillfulness
we're talking about. Is basically taking responsibility for your decision to not put up with bullshit from a partner who is more selfish, and not or to put up with changing yourself and sometimes changing yourself, like we're talking about pickup artists and things like that. Sometimes they literally become shittier people. In other words, they
adapt to the market.
Because what women actually respond to is a shittier human being. And that's just that is true, especially younger women. They do actually, now they'll say they don't like those things, and then they breed with them. And the truth of the matter is they do like shittier human beings. So maybe you have decided not to be a shittier human being, and you're not willing to make that compromise.
You take your licks where you choose.
Well, then you have to take responsibility for your decision to not provide what the market requires of you in that case. You have to take responsibility and say, I have decided not to do that. I have decided, I've chosen my pain. This is the pain that I choose over this other pain, which is, it would be too much of a pain for me to completely alter my personality and my habits and my exactly who I am on the inside.
And be with someone who doesn't make you as happy as someone better could, but you choose to be like, oh, well, fine, anyone will do as long as I'm in a relationship.
Right.
And so
you have to understand there are decisions that you implicitly made, and you need to make them explicit.
Right.
You need to recognize your implicit decisions and make them explicitly, or at least explicitly recognize that they are decisions. That you've said, I'm not going to put up with this sort of partner or this sort of partner or this sort of partner, and that's why I am currently single. Because and part of it has to do with just simply random encounter as well. There are only a small number of people who will fit the profile of what it is that you're willing to put up with, and you may have this overly idealized perspective about how many of them there are, but maybe you're just wrong about that. Maybe there are very few, and you see all these relationships.
Exactly.
You see how many people
Facebook and Instagram relationships, so you only see what they want to show you.
You only see what's on the outside. You only see the good part of it. You do not see
sometimes
the negative
it's not even real.
You do not see the negatives, the prices that they are paying, and you don't recognize how much you would not pay that price that they are paying, and you just idealize it and think that they're not paying a price.
you want the thing they're buying, but you're not willing to pay the price. So
exactly.
you can't have that thing then. If you're not willing to pay the price, then you don't get the thing, and that's okay. But if you do want the thing, you better cough up the price.
You have to recognize they are one thing. And that's true. That's a lesson that's valuable throughout life. Anything that you want, you better want the price it takes to get it, because it is one thing. It is not two things. It is not separate. You can't want a thing that requires a price without also wanting to pay the price. Wanting to. That's the difference between people who accomplish things and people who don't. Is that you have to, is the people who accomplish things, they desire, they get, like if somebody wants to get muscles, they want to get big, they desire the workout itself. They desire the pain. They desire, they pick that pain and say, I want that because it is the same thing as my goal. Each single step is the accomplishment of my goal. That pain that I feel is the progress. It is one thing.
That's exactly how I get through the pain of like having to do something physical, like I don't know, squeeze something, or like take a bullet out of a wound, you know, like
you know, as often as we do that, you know. Being assassins and all. Oh wait,
whoops, did we say that? Are we still muted or shit?
Damn it. Anyway, you were continuing, you were saying.
Yeah, but no, that's straight up how I trick my opioid system into, you know, getting into gear. If I have to do some sort of, like, you know, ripping off a Band-Aid, kind of like some sort of painful physical thing, you very much ready your mind in the sense that this pain is that thing getting out. It is one. The pain is the result. And that's what that feeling of pain is. It pain, you know, the pain is weakness leaving your body, basically.
Yeah, exactly. Well, the type, it's a, you choose your pain, or your pain chooses you. And guess what? The pain that will choose you is always the one that you don't want. So you have to always be choosing your pain. It's just like when it comes to working out and things like that, and exercise. You either choose to undergo the pain of those sorts of things, or the pain of being weaker and your body breaking down faster, and the suffering that creates will choose you instead. It will come to you because you did not choose the other pain. And so the point is that prices are one with the goal, and always making sure to put those together instead of always trying to childishly separate them is one of the most important things that people miss when it comes to relationships, etc. Is that they're unwilling to pay the price, or at least they're not willing to see that there is a price to pay, and they decided not to pay that price. And that's the thing. Sometimes some prices are too high, and that is okay. If you've decided that, then just don't bellyache about it. Recognize that was your decision, and you should be happy with it. You should appreciate it. You should say, I'm happy with this decision. It's a decision I've made. And the point is just instead of allowing it always to be implicit decisions that you're just kind of letting it go happen in the background, think about it and recognize you have made a decision. Or if you had made implicit decisions in the past and don't like those decisions because you didn't really think them out, then change it. Change your decision. Change what it is that you've decided to accept and to do. So that was just a conversation that we're having to recap, because one of the pains that I decided with my partner is to have somebody who's a goddamn chaotic. Yes.
Chaotic neutral, baby. Or chaotic.
And so, you know.
No, chaotic good, really.
Yeah.
But mostly chaotic.
I'll live an existence of pure chaos.
It's true. But okay, so the other thing that we're looking at here is the personalities and characteristics of people who like to spend time alone. So this whole article is basically looking at people who are single, lifelong singles, or people who just like to be alone, or people who are currently single, and trying to find out if there's a personality type. Is there something that unites people who are comfortable being single and things like that? So actually looks like there is. So let's look at people who are unafraid of being single. Turns out studies found that people who are unafraid of being single are more open-minded, less neurotic, more agreeable, more conscientious, more extroverted, not overly sensitive to rejection, and don't get their feelings hurt Don't get their herrings too easily.
Don't get their herrings first.
Too easily. Yes.
A heading.
But they also don't have a particularly high need to belong. So that's not an issue. And they don't feel that compulsion to belong either, which can be a good thing or a bad thing. And their self-esteem does not depend on how the relationship is going. So that's all pretty straightforward. Now, not sure what single at heart is, but that is a thing apparently in this article. You guys can definitely check that out afterwards. Everyone who's watching and listening, you will be able to review all the references in the post on Patreon, and they are free. So you go to patreon.com/AnnaCherry and check out if you would like to support the podcast. This would be amazing. And you have to go to patreon.com/AnnaCherry. I would recommend the Challenger tier because you get to hang out with us after the show and discuss things that we went over in this episode, any episode, as well as some secret special stuff, articles for patrons only. Or you can just check out the 31 episodes of CherrySTEM that we currently have uploaded to Patreon for free. Download audio files. There's an RSS link in the description of this video, as well as in Patreon itself. So let's look at people who stay single for life. So lifelong singles. So lifelong singles are more optimistic, and this was a study of more than 10,000 Australian women in their mid-70s. So lifelong singles, but Australian. And women.
Yeah, it's a little different.
More optimistic?
Well, no, the fact that they're women. I mean, women feel like they're making the choice.
But these are lifelong single women, so they have no children.
Right.
And
I'm just telling you, women feel like they're making the choice to be single much easier
more than guys. I see. Yes. Okay. So then we have another study of midlife adults in U.S. that have been lifelong singles compared to people who've been married for 5 years. And they found that lifelong singles experience more personal growth.
Oh, I believe that.
Probably because they're not saddled with kids and a job.
Yeah.
House, whatever, everything. Then there's another same study.
Yeah, the popping out kids really quickly. Really, it's people always talk about how kids are so great. Yeah, but they're also fucking terrible. They're both.
But this is consistently married people over a 5-year period, so it's a pretty small period of time. So we're looking at
so many people.
True. You could already have 2 kids by 5.
Yeah,
5 years.
You could have 5 kids.
True.
Yeah, no, people are always and
some of your siblings have done
that. Absolute devastation that reeks in a life cannot be. I mean, there's immense, beautiful joy for the children, and horrific devastation on every other part of your life as well. Both things happen. People always want to try to make it seem like you can't have one. Can't be something that is beautiful and fulfilling and stuff, and also be absolute devastation. It can't be both. Yes, it can be both. It is both. That's how it fucking works.
That's like having a hyper kitten that we have right now. He brings us so much joy with his love of life, but he gets into everything. Everything's broken. Everything falls down.
Such a massive pain in the ass.
Just like me.
Yeah, exactly.
So the same study of the midlife adults in U.S. That are lifelong singles compared to people consistently married over a 5-year period found that people who stayed single experience more autonomy and self-determination. Now this is both genders. So there's definitely an element that you feel, especially men, I believe, would feel like they have more autonomy if they're not married. Because how many jokes and reality do we have of married men sitting at the mall in a row with the purse, just wasting time? Like there's so much autonomy, I feel like, that is missing once a man becomes in a married relationship.
Yeah. It's basically, it's expected.
So both men and women seem to.
Servitude is expected of a man once he's married.
And I'm sure a woman.
Absolutely. That all of society upholds the view that a man is a servant once he's married.
And society also upholds the view that the wife is doing all the emotional labor and all the housework and all the cooking, even though that's not been reality for like 20 years.
20, 50, at least, minimum.
Well, yeah, ever since we had washing machines and people going out to eat, there's no more cooking and cleaning really that women do. So
no, that's an artifact of a culture that was starting to die 70 years ago.
So on one hand, men are expected to be servants, but on the other hand, I think women buy into the bullshit that they are no longer free, which is why we have both genders that are married feel less like there's less autonomy.
And the truth of the matter is that it should
and
be.
Self-determination.
Here's the thing: in a period of time back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, when a woman was put up on a pedestal, you're supposed to open the door for her, you're supposed to do all those things. That was great because at the same time she was also expected to do these other things, and a man was expected, and there's an equitable relationship going on there. But what happens in all kinds of relationships, and this is a large scale relationship between men and women in general, but it happens in small scale relationships, that somebody starts no longer holding up their end, but still requiring the other to hold up, and that's what's happening basically with the entire war between the sexes that is starting to tear us apart. And that is, we either one or another person is trying to hold to old standards on one case and not in the other. In other words, they don't want to put forward what it is that they're supposed to be giving in return, and there's a huge number of those things, but they do want to expect that the other will uphold that standard. That was a balance. There was a balance between it. It's just like the way in which there was a dominance hierarchy between men and women at a certain point. That dominance hierarchy had a balance, and that is that you were expected as a man to go out and to do your very fucking best to take care of your goddamn family. You absolutely had to. You had no fucking choice, because you were a piece of shit if you didn't, because your wife was there. She was taking care of the kids. She was doing her damn job, and you better motherfucking do your goddamn job in return. And that was because there was an implicit agreement of society.
There's a labor division.
That there was a division of labor, and if one of those two parties if the woman wasn't taking care of the kids, she wasn't making the meals, she wasn't doing the things that she was.
Especially in villages, you homeschooled, so like you have to take care of the kids for them to learn.
And so the truth of the matter is, there was a balance, there was a division of labor, and even when it comes to a hierarchy of who makes decisions, guess what? When a man was making the decision of how they were going to spend their money, he was also expected to be a
Depends on what kind of decision it is.
He was also expected, the reason why he was making the decisions was for their good, because he was trying to make them happy.
Exactly.
Because he was trying to make his wife happy, because he was trying to make his kids happy. And that was expected of him, that his entire desire was not to serve himself and to just make himself happy.
That's what leaders do. They make their
because even
subjects
back then,
happy.
if a guy was taking all of his money, if his wife didn't have nice things, and he was buying himself a boat and gambling and drinking, and everybody saw him as a piece of shit. That's how, because they understood his responsibility. If he's going to be the one making the decisions, if you get the final say,
if you're the leader,
then it is your responsibility for that final say to be for the good of the other. That was what there is a trade-off. It's just like when you sit there and think about, like, well, who's in control in a taxi cab? Is it the driver or is it the passenger? Obviously, there's a way in which it is both, and you can decide to say, oh, it's only the taxi driver because he's the one with his foot on the pedals, or it's only the person in the back because they're the one deciding where you're going. You can try to make that decision, and it's not the truth. That's not reality. Reality isn't that fucking simple, and so that's part of what's gone on between male and female groups, is that things have changed, and there is this implicit renegotiation happening without any kind of explicit saying, no, we're no longer doing that, or we're no longer doing that, and you don't get to claim all the benefits and without upholding any of the responsibilities, and neither party gets to do that. And you do have parties on both sides trying to claim all the benefits and none of the responsibilities. That's true on both sides.
It's true. So yeah, let's see. Back to the list. We have more personal growth, more autonomy, which is what we covered just now. Autonomy or / responsibility. The level of self-sufficiency. All right. So a study of nearly 7,000 Wisconsin adults in their mid-50s found that those who have been
just recapping is that's what I was talking about, was the autonomy thing, and the whole idea of the men holding the purse and things. That the reason why is because to a certain extent it wasn't seen as a diminutive servile role. It was like a man was doing something for her as a gift. as a favor, and he was respected in doing it. And now it is the exact same actions have become a servile role.
But women were doing things for men too.
Exactly, because it was expected that a man is supposed to he's done these other things and he's gotten what it is that he's supposed to get, and now it's her turn and he's supposed to then respond in kind. And that's because there was an equality of what was given to him, and then he is supposed to, so he's not shamed and servile for holding her purse while she does that. It's just a necessity. He's being nice. It's a favor, and it's a favor that is owed because of the favors she's done him. But when those favors have not been done, then he is a servant, then he is a fool. And so the exact same actions depend upon what has been going on.
Right.
And so that's why what people they implicitly are feeling and sensing, and nobody is explicitly putting words to.
Yeah, I mean there was a time when putting your coat over a puddle so a woman could step over it was the right thing to do, because women were weaker sex and they had, there was a balance.
And they automatically gave that position to a man and the benefits that went with it.
Right, the leadership position.
But then when they look down on you, do not give you any of those benefits, and then also expect you to put your coat over the water, then you are a servant, you are a fool, you're a lesser thing. So the exact same actions, dependent upon the context, are changed in character dramatically, and people just aren't calling this out and saying this is the reason why there is a problem, because the situation has changed, and so the same actions that you expect of us are no longer valid.
Right, exactly.
Unless you also uphold those actions on your end of the bargain is
scales.
No longer. There was a balance.
Yeah.
So even gifts, there is always a balance when it comes to. If someone is always giving to some other person who's giving them nothing in return, then it's foolishness. And so we have to. There is a difficulty that people look at. Oh, gifts are just pure. You has to become out of the pureness of your heart. That's actually bullshit. Okay,
it's a social contract.
Right, exactly.
A gift is a social contract.
It is, and we have to be okay with that. It's still beautiful to be giving and not care too much about what you receive in return. That is true.
Giving to strangers.
But there is a mutual benefit that needs to be called out and recognized, that is always there. When a mother is feeding its child.
Agreeableness, cooperation, that's what
they are doing a loving, sacrificing thing, and they are also selfishly maximizing their genes. They do want that child to be like them and to carry forward their ideas and to give them love and return and respect and all of those things. So when someone takes care of their child, they do expect things in return, and that's okay. That is part of fucking reality, and we always try to separate these things.
Kids didn't give their consent to be born.
That's part of reality, that it can still be beautiful and also have these
mechanistic or whatever.
Yeah, these requirements of some level of balance. And that's part of the problem of why we try to purify things to an extent that is unrealistic. We try to say, oh, it's only this one pure thing, and that's
it's only magic or it's only animal.
It's right. You can't simplify shit like that. That's not how reality works.
Nuance? What's that?
Anyway, so you were continuing on to
we're talking about another study of nearly 7,000 Wisconsin adults in their mid-50s found that those who have been single all their lives were less extroverted than those who are married. So maybe getting into a marriage is a function of an extrovert to begin with. So Wisconsin is a pretty specific area, but still 7,000 is a really big sample size.
It said
7,000 people in their mid-50s from Wisconsin found that those who were married were more extroverted than those who were not married.
Yeah, but the marriage
never married.
Right. The marriage could lead to the extroversion, the causal factor.
Or it could be you're already extroverted, which is what causes you to marry in the first place. It could be either one.
Yeah, exactly.
So they also found that their level of self-esteem was exactly the same.
And the fact that they're married does not mean that it's a happy marriage. There's a lot of people who stay together because it is a useful partnership and it brings them something, but it doesn't necessarily bring them a lot of happiness or fulfillment.
Well, being married and extroverted doesn't necessarily mean you're even in a marriage. Let's look at Jeff Bezos and his wife. For instance, they've been quote unquote separate or whatever for a while, so they're technically married, but they're also going to events separately. So there's some confounds like that. They're being extroverted and they are married, but they're not actually together.
Yeah.
They both have lovers, so it's something like that too. Could be something like that. And then of course they did another study, which is a huge survey of more than 30 European nations that found that their self-esteem was the same and people are single versus people who are married. So in Europe, they don't give a fuck if you're married or not, which is actually so true because my parents, well, my biological dad and my mom divorced when I was 3, and since the time I was 4 or 5, I've had a stepdad that lived with my mom for 13 years, and the only reason they got married is so that they could go to America together as a couple. So I've had a stepdad my whole life, and they never married. They didn't give a fuck. Common law marriages are way more common in Europe, and so people don't judge you for not being married. And there's not as strong of a religious element of, for instance, like it is in politics and other places where you have to have a family and children in order to appear like the ideal candidate, in order to have the, you know, the picket fence, the wife, the wholesomeness. That's, you know, lawless pagan Europe, you know how it is. So a study of more than 200,000 people from 31 European nations showed that lifelong single people valued freedom more than married people did. But this isn't just lifelong singles either. Divorced, widowed, and cohabiting people also valued freedom more than married people.
Yeah.
So specifically going through the legal marriage.
But here's the thing. Valuing freedom, a lot of times, that's a two-edged sword as well. People who value the freedom to exploit and take and be self-centered a lot of times as well.
To not care about the other person. To not have to
give a shit about anybody but their own wants, and just take as much as they possibly, that anyone will allow them to take. And that's a lot of times what the lust for freedom is about. Is don't make me ever limit myself.
Yeah, at the risk of throwing libertarians under the bus, it's kind of like one of those things that I hear a lot in certain libertarian circles where they want freedom, but they also want borders, meaning they want absolute freedom for themselves to do whatever they want to do.
And they want everyone else to be limited.
And they want everybody else to keep the fuck out of their business.
Right.
To be limited.
There's tons of people who don't recognize that limiting of others means you must then also be limited. You must be limited. And so there's people, a lot of times the lust for freedom when it is unbalanced and absolute is just childishness. It's childish self-centeredness of wanting to have your way and not giving a shit who it impacts, having no responsibility. It's a completely irresponsible state. And people don't recognize that because we hold freedom as like this absolute perfect value in the U.S. because it's freedom. And
it's baked into our Constitution. It's part of the identity.
Yes, of course it is valuable. Of course, everyone there's something beautiful and powerful and important about freedom. And of course, anytime that we try to set up any system in which we are all working with each other in a way where we have laws so that people don't fuck each other over.
That's a limiting of freedom.
Then somebody always, yes, exactly. There is that is always the limiting of freedom because that is a type of giving people the freedom to live without exploitation. But then that always
it's a trade-off of freedoms.
And exactly, and it always becomes some jackass will always start to use that to control and to take,
find some loophole
and there's I'm talking about that's bottom up. I'm talking about top down. There's people who will control the laws to take more and more freedoms away, under the auspices of helping people when in fact they're just helping themselves. And then there are people who, no matter what the law is, the laws can always find a loophole. And so when your intentions are to get around laws, you will find a way around laws. And people will continue to add laws and add laws and add laws until it's so complex that basically the addition of law it only decreases the value of law in general. It makes it because you have added more and more complexity. You've made it more and more unstable. You've added more and more.
It's like a labyrinth. You can't navigate it. Yeah.
Right. Well, not just that, because of the finiteness with which you have to then start to interpret it.
It's like telling a robot to go, like how to instruct her. It's like this that thought experiment, right? How do you instruct her? Like tell a robot to go do a simple task, and so here you are instructing the robot.
Turn left and it starts spinning in circles like with
right. So you have to put in very explicit, exact wording.
And there are people who are idealists, and especially those, unfortunately, people who are programmers think that you can then, and programmers and mathematicians tend to think that you can explicitly define a system which will do exactly what you want.
But if you want that system to grow, you can't.
And they also are very bad at exception handling.
Yeah.
But the point is that there is a This actually brings up kind of a difficult topic, because trying to explain to a person who believes that you can design a perfect system, that you can't design a perfect system, is a very, very, very long discussion.
Well, the only system that can be perfect is an adaptable system, in my opinion.
And an adaptable system is not one that is made of hard, fast, specific
you have
rules.
to give it flexibility.
The specificity itself is a vulnerability.
Flexibility and personal judgment, if we're talking about a government system.
This is basically girdle incompleteness, and there is the point is the more.
We'll talk about it next year, stuff.
Okay. The more complexity you add, the more loopholes that you create, and so there is a transition point. I mean, having laws is important, but there is a level of judgment that allows those laws to be flexibly interpreted that is very important as well. Because as soon as you start to get it down to try to get it down to very hyper specific rules, then what happens is that those rules are more exploitable, and that's what's going on in our system today. The moneyed interests have a tremendous amount of money to put towards lawyers to seek out every possible exploit, and anybody who's a gamer or things like that can find that, it's like, oh, there's always some way to exploit a game. You can keep even as simple as games are, which are just a billionth of a billionth as complex as reality is. Then you can still find ways to exploit systems. There's always these exploits, and they're always, the more rules you add, the more you create exploits by each additional thing you add to a system that was, especially
it's yet another foothold potentially.
Especially if you don't bring that system to the ground and redesign it from first principles. If you keep adding to a structure that was meant to do one thing, and then you added to it, it becomes this piece of shit because the foundation doesn't match what you built on top of it. And so so that's what happens with rules of with the rule of law. Why it always ends up degrading into a big pile of shit is because you try to pedantically manage it, and that just won't work. And the more finite you get with the rules, the more people will find ways around them, which is why we have the corporations ruling us now, and everything's falling apart. But that's a digression for another time. How do we even get on this subject?
No, but yeah, we can. I definitely like the whole incompleteness, loops, all of that stuff. I don't know much about it, so I'd have you on here to interview about all of the complex systems and system building and all that. That would be a fun episode, I think, especially since software engineers are a type that I have. So
and they have
speak their language,
and they have their strengths that create weaknesses. Just like this is one of the things I always have to point out. I have various analogies I repeat very frequently, like the taxi. Who's in control of the taxi?
Yeah, I think it's been 15 minutes since you've said that analogy. I think it's time for say it again.
Well, the other damn it, I kind of lost track of what I was saying here. Hold on.
Trade-offs.
Fuck. Shit. Totally lost my train of thought. Totally, you derailed it by referring back to that thing, because that got me. You got me.
Take that. Going to a little bit of hard science. Let's look at fucking yourself.
Oh, yeah.
No, not quite. But there's an experiment that could end infertility. And so it's based in Japan, of course. Many of you may know, especially from the more alarmist channels, the especially anti-natalists, which is a movement, anti-natalism. I kind of count myself as halfway in the movement, halfway not, but it's a real movement, anti-natalism, and there's quite a strong backlash or a counter movement to anti-natalism. I guess we'll call it natalism. So you will frequently hear on particular more alt-right-ish channels about the decline of birth rates in Japan and about infertility in minority Latin and Asian women in America. And yeah, that's a thing. Infertility is an issue that we're currently dealing with. So what to do about all this? Well, people in Japan, and particularly Saito Mitanori, or I guess his first name's Saito, so Mitanori Saito, I'm assuming, is a cell biologist in Kyoto University in Japan, and he's the field's top researcher in this sort of futuristic fertility clinic. But I mean, that's not really the point for him. He wants to, he's dabbling in it. He calls it's still a fantasy. You can just imagine whatever you'd like to imagine. So he doesn't believe that it's implementable yet. But the idea is you take a stem cell from a person and you make that into a sex cell, a gamete, so an egg or a sperm. And that allows people to essentially, a single woman to have her own child, or same-sex couples to have a child that is related to both of them biologically, or to even have trans people. We discussed, when you couldn't hear, we talked about epigenetics and the fact that that's actually kind of a confound, or an issue that we're not sure where to go from here, because how do stem cells, what do stem cells do? Do you roll back all epigenetics if you harvest a stem cell, or is it all still there? Such as, we talked about Dolly, the sheep Dolly. That was the first cloning event ever. And what they did with her is they scraped some of Dolly's DNA and they put it inside, they injected it and replaced the DNA of an embryo, that was another sheep embryo. So they kind of roughly cloned the sheep like that. But here we're talking about taking a person's stem cell. It's a cell that can become anything, any kind of cell whatsoever. So my question is, like, what are the genetics of stem cells? Is it that you go all the way back to the very beginning in the sense of the genetics, how they were when you were born? Or does it still have some of those epigenetic changes? Because epigenetics is a really fascinating field, and I think it's starting to become a little more mainstream. But little things, such as even the weather, the climate in which a child is conceived, can change their obesity levels, for instance. So there's direct evidence of that what causes obesity is actually white adipose tissue, so white fat. But humans have white fat and brown fat is like healthy fat. And they found that being conceived in a cold climate versus a hot climate leaves greater deposits of brown adipose tissue versus white adipose tissue, and vice versa. So people who are born in hot climates are actually more predisposed towards obesity because of the ratio of fats that they have in their body based on the climate that they were conceived in. So it's really fascinating to look at epigenetics and the differences that you can have in essentially the same genetic material, specifically based on the environmental factors, diet, climate, things like that. And and then genetic memory too. That's another thing that we've proven.
One of the things that's interesting is that, like, they've studied risk-taking behavior in populations in which the mother was undergoing some starvation sort of issues. So there was so you want me to continue on? Okay. So basically,
not acknowledge these things.
So the I've lost my co-host, and she doesn't want me to tell you that, so I'm not going to tell you.
Memory, epigenetics.
Yeah. So anyway, we're going to talk about genetic memory, I guess. So so one of the interesting things that's been going on with genetic memory. I'm totally lost without somebody to talk to. I don't do. I can
hear you.
Yeah, but no, this isn't good for me. I did not sign up to do this by myself.
But we've done this so many times before.
Yeah, I know. Just I'm not without a person present. So give us just a moment as we go on break.
Why did you suddenly break? Are you still mad at me for earlier?
No.
Because normally you can...
Yeah, I wasn't... Okay,
We've traded off going to the bathroom so many times during these streams.
Except I was doing the show with you completely at that time, whereas I'm doing something else right now. And so, therefore, I wasn't following along the context very well. And so,
I see.
If I wasn't deeply in the context, I
see what you did. You just fucked off from the show and started doing something else.
Damn right.
It's all right. That's deserved. So, okay. I'm here.
What did you want to talk about? Because I'm not with the context. I don't know what
Yes, you are.
is.
We're talking about creating in vitro fertilization of yourself, stem cells, rolling them back, genetic memory, epigenetics.
Okay. No, that's why I didn't remember that because we'd already talked about it once, and so it's that I'm not going to remember, the
things you already got rid of.
Right, exactly. We've already done this once.
I know. I'm sorry.
Okay, so yeah, so there's an interesting question
because I don't know how stem cells work. Do they go back to the beginning? Or
I think that there's two different kinds of reversal of stem cells that they go from.
Because that's what we're talking. We're talking taking an adult cell and turning it.
The initial development of the cells, they differentiate into subgroups, and then those groups differentiate and they branch off, and like one of the first branches they're still pluripotent cells. They're not omnipotent. They're not capable of producing every type of cell. So the first
fork in the road, you go from omnipotent to pluripotent. So it could be everything to it could be just some things.
Right.
And then from there, once it differentiates another fork in the road into a skin cell, inside organ cell versus brain cell, the three types. I forget what they're called. Mesothelioma?
Mesoderm.
Mesoderm,
ectoderm,
and
endoderm.
And yes, the skin. Or in between organs.
Right. So those are the three major pluripotent cells that are first.
And they're usually coded yellow, pink, and blue when you're drawing them in developmental biology books. Actually, that's a standard.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, but okay, I did not realize there was a color standard for it.
Yeah, the skin is the yellow, the brain is the blue, and the internal organ is the pink.
You sure that's not standard for just one book or something?
I don't know. Yeah, it was a standard road, so fuck, I don't know.
Maybe.
I'll have to look into it.
Anyway, so there's different types of differentiations that can happen. And so there's first a differentiation into okay, now this cell can become a bunch of other things, but not absolutely every possible other thing it could have become from the start. Right. And so the question she's kind of asking is when we back them up, how far do we back up those stem cells? Because a stem cell... And here's the thing where I'm not absolutely certain is that a stem cell may include pluripotent cells because I think I've heard the term pluripotent stem cell because it is capable of doing a lot of different things, and so it can be. I could see how they would still call it a stem cell, or do they back it all the way up to omnipotent where it can fucking be anything? And I don't know that. That's I could see it going both ways. But then the question is with epigenetics. Epigenetics is
genetic memory.
You have genetic memory. You have these changes that happen that are probably mediated by changes to non-coding DNA because genetic memory has been proven through where the trauma in these mice have made it where they actually react negatively to smells that were associated with the trauma, and so we've proven that genetic memory does occur. It's just we've only proven it in a very vague fashion. I mean the proof wasn't vague.
It would be unethical
the memory
to do it
was
with humans.
Right. Well, exactly. It would be unethical to do it with humans, but the memory was a vague fear response to traumatic stimuli is what was passed along.
It was an association of trauma and smell.
Which, I mean, obviously, if you can pass along the information that encodes the behaviors of instincts in brain structure, which we would assume that that's the way that it occurs because it's not magic, then obviously you would be able to pass along other experiences in the way that it structures the brain. So it's not some sort of wild idea. It's just we hadn't proved it up at this point. It was only kind of a science fiction concept until more recently. But the question is, if you're going to have these changes that are occurring to your DNA, then when they back out the changes, these differentiations, are they backing out those other small changes that happen because of specializations that each organism specializes to their environment, and that happens on a genetic level? And also, is it going to be? What about things that happen to genetic memory? Are those things going to be backed out, or are they going to be, stuck with DNA that's very much kind of dysfunctional because it's too specialized? Because that's what happened with Dolly. Is that her genes were too specialized to an older adult animal, and so therefore she immediately started getting the same kinds of. She basically looked and in health terms was the same age as the donor. So the clone basically gained no additional lifespan and would die at the same time, like literally in time, not from birth to death, but date as the original. So there's not really in that first shot at cloning, basically they were passing on the aging to the clone, and
which defeats the whole purpose.
Yeah, but that is probably not the case anymore in modern. So if you can back it up, if you can reverse the differentiation process, then basically you're undoing a lot of those sorts of specializations that are part of aging. Now, that's only one part of aging. The other part of aging, of course, is damage and loss of telomeres. So there's these random errors that are occurring, but that is not all of aging. All of aging is not random errors or transcription problems because of telomere length.
That would fix aging a lot easier.
Part of the aging process is the specialization of cells. They are specialized to the chemical balances of the foods that you eat. They're specialized to the environmental changes that you undergo, the various mineral balances, the substances you take, the stresses, the bacteria. You actually have lateral gene sharing with some of the bacteria and viruses and things that you have encountered. There's definitely viral genes that get put into your genome that actually can stay there and without causing the cell to kill itself. It just has random pieces of genetic code from viruses stuck into the various cells that can actually make it into gametes, or it can make it into, or at least it can make it into some of these cells that they're using for stem cells. So there's a variety of issues that you have to look at that will be interesting when it comes to any kind of attempt to clone an adult person.
Yeah, because right now it's very much a, as he calls it, fantasy. He doesn't believe, Saito doesn't believe that it's applicable just yet.
And what he means by fantasy is that it's not that it's not possible, and all of the various technologies have actually been proven, but what they mean is that it's not feasible. In other words, just because you can get it to work 1 out of 100 times doesn't mean that is anything like a marketable thing.
It's an implementable strategy, yeah.
Right, or or something that anyone will ever use because of the total expense and trouble required to do it. And so what he's talking about when it being kind of just a fantasy right now is because we don't know how viable these processes will be for the use in commercial terms or in common, even being used commonly. It may just never. Well, at least not for 150, 200 years. It may not be something that can reach a level of feasibility that people could use it commonly. And so he's not saying that it's impossible, because each one of these various things that he's relying upon have been proven to be possible. It's just it can just be ridiculously useless. Like a lot of people don't realize it is possible to turn lead into gold. It's just the amount of energy and expense and time and trouble and things that you put into it are far, far, far more than you would get.
Just go buy some gold.
Right. Well,
it's cheaper to buy gold.
It's just they're not even comparable.
Right.
There are processes that can change a small amount of lead into gold because they're very close together. That's something that's actually not very well known, but it is something that is just not useful. It's a fucking useless technology. So,
but it is real.
Right. There's something that people. That's like part of alchemy.
Mm-hmm.
It's something that, unfortunately, I'm not sure how well known this information is, because it's something I know by a contact with somebody who was part of the Manhattan Project and one of the scientists there, and he does science on and experiments, and so there's I'm not sure how well known that fact is. Actually, I just realized
that you can make lead into gold.
Right, it is something that is. How well known is that? Damn it! Now I don't know.
All right, well, let's look it up. Yeah, so one of the other it's Hayashi and Saito are the two researchers leading this project, and they constantly get emails because Japan and struggle, and so they constantly get emails from people wanting to use this, and they have mixed feelings about it, because they're like, it's complicated. Actually, Hayashi says, on this side I really want to help them, but on that side it's actually too preliminary to adapt.
Okay, it's widely enough known that it's not going to be It's just like, oh god, this may be one of those rare instances where I know stuff that most people don't know, and then they're gonna think I'm fucking crazy. And it's like, no, it's on fucking Wikipedia. Most people actually do know it. Thank God.
So yeah, the global figure in infertility is kind of hard to tally, but so I was mentioning in the beginning that there's infertility in the world, but I didn't give you any numbers. So here we are. The World Health Organization puts an estimate at 48.5 million couples. So that's a lot of couples, but not that many if you think about the billions of people that are in the world. So 48.5 billion couples, 48.5 million couples are estimated to be infertile. And in the United States, the CDC, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, estimates that fertility treatments have been used by at least 7.3 million women. So in US alone, 7 million of women have tried fertility treatments. And I'm sure this includes both trying to increase their own egg production for potential birth conception, or using donor eggs, or doing whatever. So of course, 1978 was when the first IVF, in vitro fertilization baby, Louise Brown, was born. It's pretty much the same procedure now as it was then in 78. But according to most recent statistics, in 2016, there were 200,000 infertility cycles, meaning women and couples have paid anywhere from 20,000 to 100,000 of dollars. I don't know how much it costs, but one cycle is estimated to cost between 10,000 and 20,000. But that's probably without getting a donor egg, because I'm sure there's extra costs associated with getting donor eggs and things like that. So in 2016, there were 200,000 infertility cycles, meaning women who tried to get pregnant using fertility treatments and it didn't do anything. So that's a lot. Of course, 200,000 versus 7 million, theoretically, the rest of those 6 million got their babies. But I don't know. It's not a very successful procedure. So some of the questions, of course, like what if, a 90-year-old wants to clone themselves? What about people who are dead? If we use their skin and tissue to have babies, that opens up a lot of interesting avenues. So, like, what if skin or hair stolen from celebrities? Like,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, that could be a lot of problematic stuff there. And then, of course, if we don't update our laws, you have somebody coming up to a person and be like, I have your baby. You owe me child support now, But then you can't prove that they stole a lock of hair during a meet and greet. So that could be an issue. And of course, there's the new editing tool. We got CRISPR, and that's a whole nother fucking can of worms. Because CRISPR is questionable. It's questionable. We just had the first babies born or conceived or whatever that were edited with CRISPR. I don't know if were they born or did they just conceive? The CRISPR babies?
I think they were born, yeah. No, I think they were a successful live birth. Yeah.
Successful live birth. So let's see how they fare, because in our understanding, CRISPR, if you remove one particular gene for like eye color or whatever, it can actually have downstream effects on other genes that you don't know are coupled with it.
Right. It's not as selective as they first believed it was, or something to that effect. The CRISPR-Cas9 system. Yeah. But it is passed down to offspring, so those children that are born, they will pass this genetic alteration down to their offspring. And the alteration, I think, was it resistance to AIDS, or was it to sickle cell anemia, or
it was something like that.
Something, I don't know. It was resistance to something that he gave them. But what's funny is going back just a second here. Apparently, Ernest Rutherford is he's well known for as one of the main fathers of atomic physics, and apparently him and Frederick Soddy were They first discovered that radioactive thorium was converting itself into radium. And at the moment of realization, Saudi later recalled, he shouted out, "Rutherford, this is transmutation." And Rutherford snapped back, "For Christ's sake, Saudi, don't call it transmutation. They'll have our heads off as alchemists."
But it is.
Yeah, it is. The alchemists were right. They just were wrong about what it takes to do it.
Yeah. You don't need to sacrifice millions of people for a Philosopher's Stone, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
For those Full Metal Alchemist fans in the audience. So now let's move on to couples. So, singles, you're just as awesome as everyone else. And you made a decision to probably be single, whether you're aware of it or not.
Or you at least should go ahead and make that decision,
now that you're thinking about it. Yeah. And then, of course, if you are single, you can go fuck yourself and have babies. Eventually. So, I had to use that again. Because it made you laugh the first time. So.
And it got me again because I wasn't expecting it. Sweet. I was like, and for those people who are single, you can go fuck yourself. What? What? How did it turn so violent?
So, let's look at 10 ways to make a relationship last. So, if you are, and this is for the ladies out there, for ladies, actually, pretty much anyone who is used to not really doing much ever. So, what? I mean, more emotionally immature people in general, because you know,
I'm sure there's some emotion. Hey, if they're listening to our podcast, they're probably way more fucking emotionally mature than average.
Then why the hell am I giving them these tips?
Oh.
Well, point is, I just, in my experience, and I could be wrong, in my limited experience, but I have lived on multiple continents, and am over 30 years old. But no, in my experience, men try. And in a current climate, what women are told is that they don't need to try. They already are doing too much, emotional labor, blah, blah, blah. There already is a context that guys aren't doing enough and women are doing too much. And I believe it's the exact opposite, which is why I would like to aim this towards those who perhaps don't feel like they need to do anything and are also suffering from repeated broken relationships. That's like, maybe you do need to do something.
Maybe society isn't telling you the right way to do things.
Right.
That's the thing. It's like, if we've got these huge problems with relationships.
And that's really what it is.
We've got these huge problems with relationships in this country. We've got this huge divorce rate, and we're fucking tearing each other apart. Maybe what's normal is fucking stupid. It's just a thought.
On that note, actually, what we found in yet another edition of Millennials Ruin X, the latest thing that millennials are ruining is divorces. That's a straight up finding.
Damn them.
I know.
Next?
They are. They're ruining divorces because they're waiting way longer to get married. And then on top of that, a lot of them just don't marry. They cohabit. And we, as a comedian mentioned, and something I suggest personally is... go on a road trip with someone that you're in a relationship with fairly early on, because that'll tell you what you need to know about the way they handle stress and the way they handle being cooped up with you and the way you handle each other's stress, to see if you are compatible or that you can work through it, at least to see if the other person cares or if you care to even work through some issues. And part of that, I think, with millennials is that the current economy, the way it is, a lot of people our age are cohabiting already with roommates and with their partners. And so they're waiting a long time before getting married, and they're living together first, while in the past, in the boomer generation, it used to be the exact opposite. You courted somebody, lived separately, and you lived together after getting married. To me, that's a terrible, terrible, terrible advice. Don't do that. Learn how you get along as humans in close quarters first before you do the legal plunge and, get the whole society and group involved in your marriage. And because once you have a marriage ceremony and all of that, you're inviting the group, you're inviting the community into your life. And so then everybody who showed up to your wedding, they feel like they have a personal stake in your relationship continuing. And that can cause a lot of problems for stress and you have all these expectations and you don't feel like you have autonomy, and there's all these bad things that lead to divorce, as well as other things. So yeah, millennials are ruining divorce, but it certainly is a thing. Those who got married quickly also got unmarried quickly as well. And there's ways to prolong your relationship. If you really do care about, being with this person for a long time, if you both care, that may not be enough sometimes. Good intentions are great and they're extremely important. You have to have the desire to improve or to come together. But sometimes it's useful to have tools. It's useful to know how to come together. Now, this is from Psychology Today, and it's written by Barton Goldsmith, who is in charge of emotional fitness. And we're talking about a satisfying, long-lasting relationship. Now, this is scientifically proven. This is what you can do, 10 things you can do to prolong and be satisfied in your relationship. And it's probably going to be shit that is exact counter to what you hear and see people do. But that's because how many people do you know that have lasting and satisfying relationships? If you need a little bit of personal information, as someone who is endorsing these tips myself, I not only have a degree in neuropsychology, but I also have been in an extremely satisfying relationship that has been going for 12 years. So, I know what I'm talking about, maybe a little bit. I don't know, maybe just a little. So, at least this has worked for us, and it seems to work for other people, and is scientifically proven to work. So, let's give it a shot, shall we? So, number 1, be nice to each other. Shocker, I know, but how many of us take the time every day to do little things for each other? Or how many of us have gotten into a fight or are in some way at odds with your partner or resentful over something or just having some sort of barrier between you, and then you just stop being nice? Well, a good way to rekindle that is your first homework assignment is to be nice to each other. Things like opening doors for each other, saying thank you when somebody hands you something or does something they normally do, such as, bringing you a blanket or turning on the TV so you don't have to get up, like little things that they would do anyway, but that you benefit from. Tell them thank you. Make nice meals. Say I love you. That's a big one that, when you stop saying I love you, you should pay attention to that and talk about that, because communication always is key. You have to be on the same wavelength with the other person, and you can't get there without talking. And if you've both noticed something's amiss, like you've stopped being nice to each other or you stop saying I love you, that's a great time to stop, drop, and roll. Stop, drop, and communicate. Now, number 2, find little things to do that make your partner smile or laugh. So this guy has what was his name? Barton Goldsmith, PhD. He calls this the scavenger hunt. Every day I look for something to make my partner smile. It could be a keychain, a flower, or even a good quote, or a meme. Send him a meme through Snapchat or a text message, whatever the kids are doing these days. And it's just a way to let them know that you're thinking about them, that you took the time out of your day. Just something simple as linking to a quote or a book recommendation or anything. It lets them feel that you're thinking about them, that you know them, that you're thinking about their happiness, you're thinking about enriching their lives in some way. And that can make one feel cared for.
Basically, you're sharing some joy.
Yeah.
I think that's very important. Is to have shared experience is to always create something in common, because it's crucial to feel as though you are a group. It's like that you're not just two individuals that happen to be in proximity, but that you are a group, that you are a unit. And the way that people do that is through sharing things. They share their interests in things. They share whatever. They share experience. And so that's I think that's also part of that.
Yeah, definitely. And then, of course, number 3, which is useful in all situations, not just relationships of the romantic kind, but let go of the little things that bug you about your mate. And we started our podcast with this.
Yeah, it was a demonstration. But that was actually not just bugging, but that was. Whew.
Yeah, that was a big one.
God.
It was a big oopsie.
That was a punch in the fucking balls.
You recovered from it impressively quickly. Thank you so much for that.
Well,
you rescued this show
on a regular basis.
So you're kind of like those cock and balls torture dudes, where you get kicked in because you said it was a kick in the balls, right? So I can only assume that guys that get kicked in the balls as part of a porn thing, they must develop a steel skin after a while.
Their balls are made out of concrete after a while.
Yeah. So the best way to let go of little things that bug you about your mate is to let that resentment go and try to find ways in which that thing that bugs you may be a side effect of something that you like. That's one thing. Or sometimes people live a life that's separate than yours. Somebody may like the TV louder than you do. Who are you to impose on them what you want, but who are they to impose on you? So you got to find a compromise.
Well, it's not just finding a compromise. You have to expect that there's always a give and take, that they're going to, if they, a lot of times resentment is all about feeling like they're not giving as much as you're giving. And a lot of times that feeling can develop without really examining it, and so basically you have to be willing to believe that you lie to yourself, that everyone lies to themselves, and that everyone sees their own plight as gigantic and everybody else's plight is nothing. And you have to understand that about yourself, that every human being has this fundamental fatal flaw in their personality from birth, is that they see everyone else's plight as shit and nothing, and won't think about it, and they see their own plight as this massive fucking thing. And if you can recognize that that's the truth about you and your partner and constantly be working against that, then you're actually going to be capable of having a relationship. Otherwise, if you're not doing that, well, you're just not going to be capable of really having a relationship.
Exactly. So, you may need to discuss these things because resentment arises from feeling unappreciated. However, your partner may be feeling unappreciated too. And like we said, your own plight seems stronger than the other person, so you need to talk about it to figure and look at real evidence to see what is going on. But it doesn't have to be serious. Keep it light. Remember that you are in a partnership. You're there to arrive to a better future together. You're not there to fight each other. You're there to fight the circumstances that are separating you.
And you have to realize that it's one of the hardest parts to get to, is to get to a point of truth, because there's all these excuses that come with normalcy. Like, it's normal to sit there and say, oh, you're going to go through and list every little thing that we do from each other? That is so whatever. It's bullshit. And everybody has that bullshit feeling like that is a valid argument. It's not a valid argument. And neither one of you really has. If you want to have a relationship,
if you trust me, you won't make me sign a prenup. It's things like that.
The truth of the matter is, you have to eventually reach a point where you're capable of saying, okay, look, let's go through. Let's be realistic,
right,
and talk about the things that we do for each other. And one of the ways that you can help do that is for each of you to compliment the other, instead of talking about, I do this for you, or you can at least go through, because sometimes you can't find. It's hard to recognize the things that are every day, but whereas the other person will recognize it. And so when you go through, don't have it as a competition, but to go through and say, hey, let's thank each other for the things that we do for each other. And you can go through and think of the things that you do and say, I'm thankful for that. And when they list off that, say, I do this and I do this, and say, and I'm thankful for that. And I do this and I do this and I do this, and they should be thanking you for those things too. And so it's more, so being thankful about the things that you do and looking at them, and more carefully, is something that's valuable. And the problem is, usually you're only willing to go through that process when you're in the middle of a fight. And when it's in the middle of a fight, it's resentful, really, and shitty, and a comparison and a competition, and it doesn't work, even though it still does need to be done. And so it is something that there's so many of these blocks to progress that are there because of normal attitudes about what is expected and what is a good way of doing things. And this idea that you shouldn't talk about what you do for your partner like if there's some sort of exchange. Well, guess what? There is kind of an exchange, and if you don't get to the point where you're recognizing and really being thankful for what your partner does, and they aren't being thankful to you, then you're just going to have resentment. You're going to have problems with each other, and it's going to grow in the background. It's going to split you apart. And so therefore, part of making sure that you have a relationship that can continue going is eliminating that growing resentment. So therefore, if resentment's going to grow from the fact that you believe that you're doing more than they are, and they're doing the same thing, the only answer is to go through,
shine a light on it,
and shine a light and say, I do this for you, and I do this, and I do this, and I do this, and they have to do the same. And you both have to be realistic about it and not tear it down. Be thankful and continue to talk about, and I do this, and I do this, until both of you can come to your own realization that a lot is being done. And you know what? Maybe one person isn't doing as much as the other, and sometimes you kind of have to let them recognize that. And at least if they're being thankful for the things that you're doing, you will feel less resentment. So the point is, eliminating resentment is very fucking difficult, and resentment builds up automatically. So therefore, one of the most important skills for having a long-term relationship is finding ways to eliminate resentment. And you can only do that if you're communicative, and you're only communicative if you don't buy into the normal ideas of what it is that you can say as a way to keep from communicating.
Keep your temper from flaring up, too.
Right.
Yeah. Turn into Data if you can for a moment, just or a Vulcan. Feelings are valid, but
guys normally do that.
Guys do normal. Okay, so girls.
So that's that.
Yeah.
That's the other issue is, unfortunately, there is a whole culture which teaches women to never do things in a way that will resolve issues in a relationship.
I don't want a solution. I just want to vent.
Right. And so there's all these attitudes that are, you have to understand, our society teaches horrible habits. What is normal is fucking stupid. And we need to constantly talk about that. The ideas of what is normal behavior, what is acceptable behavior, is fucking stupid, destructive shit behavior that will fuck up everything. It'll fuck up your life. It'll fuck up your relationships. Everything about normal is fucking worthless. And people just somehow can't get that through their heads. They can see normalcy shitting all over everyone's lives around them and then continue to do that which is normal. Obviously, that's wrong. But somehow we can't get that across. I don't understand why people don't get that, but they don't. And so you have to be able to identify, well, what exactly is it that's wrong about normal, and how does it go wrong? And this is one of the ways in which it goes wrong, is that people are taught you don't have to go through these certain processes. They're taught that things will just work out automatically. They're taught so many wrong lessons, and you have to be able to find them and point them out. And unfortunately, it's more difficult for women because they are taught worse lessons. They are taught that it is okay to not have certain types of conversations. They are taught that it's okay to just flail at things and to not try to come to a solution and not try to talk things out in a way that is rational, and to put away the emotion for a minute. They're not taught that. They're taught that that's okay to say fuck you forever putting away emotion. You're supposed to be super emotional about everything. They're taught that that's the way you do things, and it's a destructive way of doing things that doesn't solve any problems and just makes relationships worse. Yet they are taught that as though it is the truth of the gods. There's nothing more purely, perfectly true than this fact. And so how do you get past that is a very difficult issue.
You get past that by looking at the difference between Vulcans and Romulans. It's really simple. It's really, really obvious. It's all right there.
By giving up hope on normal girls and only dating nerdy girls.
Yeah, by giving up hope and only dating Spurgers. Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, it is very, very true. And then something that Egregious Charles mentioned in our chat here is very much relevant to that. And it's not just how, of course, women are being trained to behave differently than men, but societally in US, where arranged marriages are so frowned upon, where the idea, the lie of romance and love is that it just happens and you just feel it and it's forever when it's real. Exactly. It's all real and amazing, and if it's real, it'll just happen. And that's absolutely not true. A distinct, direct division of labor sometimes is goddamn required to not have resentment. But yet we have this like, oh, it's romance, it's all flimsy, airy, nothing is defined.
Well, if it doesn't work, it just doesn't work. Yeah, you know what? Nothing fucking just works. And that's why everything's falling apart, is because of these cultural lessons we are taught. Other cultures aren't taught that stupid lesson, okay? People are made to go into fucking arranged marriages. They're told you have to fucking work at it. You have to put effort in. You have to compromise.
Your feelings don't matter.
And your feelings don't make a fucking bit of difference. And you can make it work. And guess what? They make it work. And so in other cultures, they're not taught these stupid, worthless, horrible, destructive lessons. Yet here they're taught like they are the gospel truth. And it's hard for people to break out of that. And you have to understand, that's not that person's fault, that they've been taught their entire life that is the way that reality works. They're taught and they believe and they feel it to the depth of their bones that this is the way that reality works. So a relationship just comes together, and if you don't feel it, then it just wasn't meant to be.
From every angle.
Everything that they're told from so many different directions is to don't force it, and that is just not how reality works. But they are taught that is the best way to do things, which is why we have this epidemic of horrible relationships and relationships ending in this, because our culture is broken in that way. It's broken in a lot of different ways because we came up with these ideas that we thought we were right about, because we just, we got this new idea of how we should do things, and then it becomes part of our culture that is this new culture that doesn't have the time-tested ideas of older cultures. And so we came up with these new ideas, and we're only now starting to figure out that we have all these things that are injected into this new culture of America, and that we think of as absolute truths because they're part of the culture that's passed on to us. But then they're not absolute truths. They're complete fucking bullshit. And being able to separate out the good from the bad, the things that are valuable, the things that are productive from the things that are worthless shit, is a very difficult task that nobody's got right. But the point is, there are certain things that you can see very directly the mechanic of how it goes wrong. And if you undoing the process of resentment, of having this feeling that you're doing more than they are in the relationship, you're working more for the, that is something that is so automatic. Everybody knows, and you can see exactly how that would go wrong without communication, and you can see exactly the lessons which lead to people not doing the communication process that is necessary. So there are certain things you can reverse engineer how it all fucking went wrong.
And the number one way, in my opinion, that communication goes wrong is punishing people for telling you the truth. Which is what we saw with Liam Neeson just recently. It's like when somebody's revealing to you that they made a mistake and that they're ashamed of what they did, or just in general revealing something that they would be better off lying about, but they chose to do the hard thing and to tell you the truth, you have to reward them for that. We are punishment and reward animals, and reward always works better than punishment to encourage a particular behavior to happen. Now, punishment works really well if you don't want something in particular, if you want them to start lying to you, yeah, go ahead and punish them for truth, because that's when it's already high stakes and you punish them on top of that. They're already doing something risky, they're putting themselves out there, and they get punished on top of that. That's double the punishment for them, and they will just learn to lie in the future. At least that's most people, unless they're particularly, on the spectrum or something, when somebody is being vulnerable in one way or another, be it with the truth, with their feelings, with being radically honest, showing themselves to you, try not to let your feelings get in the way of rewarding them for opening up.
Got something with her.
All right.
Righteous indignation is a feeling. People need to be able to pick out righteous indignation in themselves and recognize it as an emotional fucking response that a lot of times is a shit fucking response.
Well, he said righteous indignation.
Oh, I know. And that's the thing, is when someone's lied to you, you feel righteous indignation. They have done wrong now, and they must be punished. But the truth of the matter is, that's a monkey response. That is this holy feeling that you get of goodness, that you are doing what is right, you are in the right and they are in the wrong, is most of the time evil, and people don't recognize. They think of it as a good when it is in fact an evil, and that is one of the things that also is a
trap. Yeah,
it's a trap. We have this feeling of righteous indignation. I have been wrong, therefore I now have the right to, and that usually ends up being that they have a blank check now to
punish them disproportionately.
Right, to get revenge. Basically, I've just gotten a revenge, and that's how that righteous indignation is what leads to lynch mobs. It's why we have all of these people who are just ruining other people's lives and careers and all of these things. These various lynch mobs that are constantly starting in this outrage culture. They are feeling righteous indignation because
they feel justified.
They feel completely justified in the punishment that they're giving. When a lot of times, first off, they have not only is it disproportionate, they don't understand everything that's going on around the situation. They've looked at it from a simple, oversimplified perspective.
They're ignoring the punishment that person might already been.
Right. They're ignoring how much punishment they've already had, but they're also oversimplifying the situation where they don't understand the context. They don't understand how it got to that point. They don't understand so much about it.
And they're not having forgiveness that they would want for themselves to have.
And they need to, and people need to understand this is not a liberal problem. It's not a conservative problem. It's a human problem. Everybody does this righteous indignation bullshit, and it's evil. And people didn't understand that feeling of goodness. They feel like I'm the good guy here. I'm in the right. I'm in the right. I'm in the right. When you are just so overcome with I'm in the right, you are evil. Okay, that is a point at which you become evil. Because that is what people use to justify all the fucking vicious, horrible things that they do, is they have the feeling of righteous indignation. Anybody who abuses a child is experiencing righteous indignation in what they're doing. I know this because I've seen them do it. They feel like they're in the right because this child has defied them over and over, or whatever it is. That there is nothing that leads people to evil more than the feeling of righteousness. And being able to pick that out is crucial to being a good human, but it's also absolutely crucial to having a relationship.
Yeah, because the righteous feeling of it makes you feel like you're not in the wrong to feel that. It's baked into it.
Absolutely certain you're right, and you feel this, and that is a monkey, as a fucking vicious, stupid monkey inside you that you have to fucking punch in the face. That's what that is. And people, and being able to recognize that feeling, identify it, and stop it is one of the most valuable things you can do to become a better human being.
Sometimes a bitch just needs to get punched.
Yeah, and the one that's inside you, that's the one that you got to punch in the fucking face.
That little bitch that's inside you, exactly.
That monkey that goes, oh, I'm in the right.
Mm-hmm. Ultimately, anytime you have extreme certainty, in my opinion, that's when shit goes wrong.
Yeah, that's usually where people commit the most evil, is in their absolute certainty. Absolute certainty.
Yeah. So just have a little doubt about everything, just in general. It's a good thing.
Have a little fucking humility.
So speaking of, number 4, the greatest gift parents can give their children is to have a good relationship with each other. And that is so true. A lot of it, for instance, in my experience, I've had, grandparents that fought occasionally, but they did things together. They farmed together, they gardened together, they did things together, and they had a division of labor. Grandpa brought in the bread and grandma sewed his sweaters and made food for everybody. And then same with, my parents. They've been together for, now much longer, but at the time of moving to America, they've been together for 13 years. And they've fought like crazy with each other, but they were always together. So that led me to be somewhat toxic in my relationships, but also very, very loyal. And that's kind of what I'm leading up to, is that if you threaten divorce around each other all the time, in front of your kids, if you're constantly fighting in front of the kids, that will lead the kids to fight with their mates, because they do learn how to be adult humans and in relationships by watching you, parents. It is what it is. It's just how it is. You can't do anything about it. It's just how it is. Children learn, humans, primates, learn from the group around them. And most of the time they spend is with you, parents. So however you treat each other and them, but especially each other, is what they encode as a way to treat their partners, as a way to behave with their children and with their partners. So if you fight a lot, your kids will probably fight in their relationships too. Sometimes there are exceptions where, for instance, when you have hyper-alcoholic parents, children actually end up staying away from alcohol, especially staying away from it in those few exceptions. And then, of course, in non-exceptions, children become alcoholics as well. But it's sort of similar thing there where...
Yeah, I was just thinking about that. It's like, yeah, those are the exceptions. It's just like most abusive parents were abused as children. That's just the facts. But that doesn't mean all abused children become abusive parents. But,
some break the cycle.
But
some.
But it is an exception that they break the cycle. That's where child abuse comes from, is people who are abused.
Sex abuse too.
And understanding that that's how humans work, is that they don't recognize that they're copying. It seems unbelievable. Unless you have personally watched it with individuals that you know, from the point of from them being the abused to being the abuser, it's kind of hard to believe that this process works this way, but it does. And being able to understand how that process occurs is very important. But it's not something that a lot of people have, I guess, access to watch and see. So it is something that unfortunately you kind of have to take on faith without the experience, without the personal experience. But that is how it works, is that people people copy. They copy so much, and they're not aware that that's what they're doing.
Copy may not be the best word. I mean, it's about learning.
Yeah,
it's about behavioral learning. It's you learn relationships. You learn how to relate to others. You learn what to do to others.
It's all the implicit lessons, I guess, that you don't realize.
You learn how to human from humans around you. And if they're shitty humans, you learn how to be a shitty human.
But the idea, okay, here's the thing.
But exactly like them.
If you think about it rationally, without any kind of emotional connection, you think about a child that's been abused, how much they hate that, how much they think that that's a horrible thing. Then how on earth could they then go on to abuse? How could they not see themselves as a monster? How could they? That doesn't seem possible. It doesn't seem rationally possible. But it is the rule, not the exception. That is what always happens, is that abused children go on to become, like, it is so many of them go on to become abusers themselves.
Well, at first, it is just they're out of control, and then they start justifying it. Just like their parents did.
Yeah, they justify it, and people...
First, they just can't help themselves.
And they do subtle alterations of what they believe the situation is, and because that's what humans do, is they don't realize that they do subtle alterations of how the situation...
Well, the moment we re-remember something, it's already changed.
It's already changing. Yeah. And so we re-remember it over and over and over, alter our memories.
Especially with retellings.
And then once we've altered our memories...
That's what we remember the next time, and then
that's all that there is. Yeah. So you change, you warp your view of history, and that's how people do these things, is they warp their view of history. People are constantly changing their own memories, and because they're not fastidious about making sure that they remember things in a way that does not paint them in a good light. In other words, anything that would paint you in a negative light, you typically alter the memory. And once you alter the memory, you don't have a real view of reality anymore. Yeah. You only have your memories. And knowing that people constantly are altering their memories is another thing that people don't recognize is how humans work. That is part of how humans work. Memory is dog shit. And especially because people have access to their own memories and they have reason to alter them. And then once they have justified
heavy reason to alter
extreme reason, exactly. So understanding that part of humanity is another thing that is valuable. It's valuable in relationships.
And in just improving your life.
Both partners understand that is something that
they are both doing.
Right. That you both have a proclivity to, it's like, maybe I'm altering maybe I want to believe it's this way. Maybe I want to, basically being able to have...
Wizard's first rule, man.
Basically being able to have some doubt. And saying, like, maybe I'm not remembering it correctly. And once you start to have some of that, like, understanding of foul ups, that you're doing your best and you're still fucking up, then you can look at other people and say, hey, maybe they're doing their best and still fucking up, and so I shouldn't hold it as much against them. I have to kind of hold on loosely, that I have to, put up with some shit, try to push them in a direction that is not them fucking me over constantly, but also, having some level of patience with their fuck ups and recognizing
because that's what love is, patience
instead of intention, and then understanding. It's like, here's the hardest part of recognizing somebody who's doing things wrong in a relationship, is recognizing that they don't remember it and don't know that they're doing it wrong, and so therefore it's hard to hold it against them. It's like
and hard to hold them accountable,
and impossible to hold them accountable because they don't believe that's what happened. They really don't. Yeah. And understanding that about humans is extremely.
That's rare. How gaslighting happens. People change their own memories.
And and then they bring you in on their delusion. That's what a lot of times gaslighting is not as intentional as it seems. It's because they are very bad at remembering how reality works, and they're very bad at managing their own memories, and eventually a mind can completely break because they've never been fastidious about how they store their memories and keep from altering them. And so because of that, the rest of their life, they're never really remembering reality correctly. So reality is a big jumbled mess to them in general. They don't, and so they're not attempting to fool you. They're fooling themselves and bringing you in on the delusion. And because they're constantly lying, because they can't do anything but lie because they don't have a real grasp of reality. Now the problem is, how do you deal with that? And there is an issue of responsibility that is like drunkenness, and that is a person who runs somebody over when they're drunk. Did they mean to run that person over? Mm-hmm. No, but they did make the decision to disable their mind. And understanding there is a level of, everybody has been, and nobody gets taught to stop disabling their mind because it's not something that's talked about frequently enough. And so we're not constantly telling people, hey, you are constantly deluding yourself. That's a normal human behavior, but you have to be watching out for it. So basically everybody is a drunk. Everybody is drinking to excess, and then through they are negligently responsible for the bad impact that they're having on those around them. But they only really, if it was commonplace in our entire society for everybody to be drunk all the time, how much could you hold people responsible for their actions if that is the normal? So that's part of the difficulty here, is that everyone is taught, they're not taught that humans are bad with their memories. They're not taught that people are delusional constantly, that everyone, especially those people who think that they're not delusional at all, they're some of the worst at being delusional, because they don't look out for it, because they don't believe in their flaws. They don't search them out to repair them. And so anybody who believes that they're flawless becomes more and more flawed, and it becomes a feedback loop. But if you have a society where everyone is always drunk, you have to start telling people, no, if you just wouldn't fucking drink, you wouldn't be running people over. And that is the part of what is difficult about relationships, is saying, okay, look, you have to be really good about remembering the shit that you do wrong, and then you have to be okay with the fact that you fuck up, because everybody's fucking up. And I'm going to be okay with you fucking up to a certain extent. I'm not going to allow it to constantly repeat it forever. Or maybe I will, so long as you are sorry about it each and every time, and you really are trying and just failing, and that's just you, is you just suck at that part of altering your personality. Okay, I'll just have to accept that. So there's these things that you have to recognize, that people, you have to be able to see them as someone innocent, and that just like you know that a person didn't run over the fucking child because they meant to, or that they were really evil and loved running over children. They were drunk. You have to see that in the same way that people don't want to see themselves as bad. They don't want to see themselves as a taker. They don't want to see themselves as a shitty person. And so they delude themselves, and they change their memories of how the situation went, and they view it from a skewed, unrealistic angle. They choose to view things that are unlikely interpretations as the more likely interpretation of the situation. That's one of the ways that people delude themselves, is they'll say, this person was doing this because of, and then there's a lot of different possibilities, and then the most likely and obvious one they will ignore, and the unlikely one that makes them look better is the one they'll remember, amplify, and that will become the only explanation.
The only memory they have.
And that's the specific mechanism by which people change their memories. Is a lot of times they'll choose all of these different causal factors that are part of why something happened, and they'll choose the one that makes them look best instead of the one that is obviously more likely, because it's not obvious to them. What's important, what's obvious to them is what they value, what they want. And so what's obvious to them is that they can't have been being a shithead, because they have good intentions. Because they have good intentions. They're not a shitty person. So therefore,
they would never do that on purpose.
So obviously, in looking back, I must have meant to do it this way. I must have been and therefore I must have becomes I did. And so there's always these little tiny subtle alterations that that disjoint and change everyone's memory, and everybody's doing this. We're all creating a situation of negligence by which, because we remember things improperly, like drunks, we are running over children. And so understanding that mechanism and saying and trying to get off the booze, because that's what we got to do, is get everybody off the booze. We got to get everybody back to being responsible for their actions by not altering their memories. And that is a hard thing. That is a really hard thing, because most people don't even recognize that people alter their memories. Everybody thinks, I mean, we have hundreds of years of eyewitness testimony and shit like that has been proven to be absolute stupid, worthless dog shit. We've got science now. We're not a bunch of apes, okay? We're not just running around clubbing each other anymore. We figured out that this is the way our minds fuck up. Running around shooting each other. Yeah. But so
that's a technological improvement.
And this is a recent improvement in our history. It is a recent part of science.
Shooting each other?
No. It's a recent part of science to recognize how much we are all altering our memories. How bad memory actually is. We were kind of living in
how
a dream
easily led it is.
Right. An idealistic dream world about our opinions. And that goes back for thousands of years. So there's thousands of years of weight of people's dumb opinions about how memory works. And there's only, this short period of time that science has proven that to be a complete pile of shit. So getting everybody off the booze is going to be difficult, because we have thousands of years of everybody basically believing this is the way that's normal. This is the way you do things. Everybody, there's nothing wrong with it.
Shit, it's tradition at this point.
There's no such thing as drunkenness. It's like this. If we were to drink anything other than alcohol, we'd get sick from the microbes in the water. But which that's a reference to the fact that a lot of times in ancient cultures, the whole reason why they were constantly drinking alcohol is because there were too many microbes in the water.
Well, I love that you're using drunkenness as analogy, because Wernicke-Korsakoff syndrome, which you get from being a drunk, causes you to replace your own memories with bullshit.
Right, you completely replace your memories.
Completely.
It really it super amplifies it.
So it's perfect example.
Yeah.
Perfect analogy.
But the point is trying to develop that right there can help a tremendous amount in your relationship when you recognize the unavoidable errors and try to get to a point where you can be forgiving, but also continue to push towards a better goal. In other words, it's like there's a fine line between accepting a person's faults and asking them that they continue to try to improve, and requiring that they continue to try to improve, and just allowing yourself to be a punching bag. And that is a difficulty that everyone kind of has a hard time with, and it goes the other way as well. And that is, just relaxing and not trying very hard, and basically taking advantage of other people's patience because you don't recognize it as patience, because it doesn't hurt to you. It feels like relaxation and ease to you to not control yourself and not be a dickhead and not be a taker. That feels good to you. So it's hard to think of the fact that that when they don't constantly stop you at every little tiny little fucking thing that you do, that they're being patient and being accepting. And it's unrealistic and ridiculous to think that a person could stop you at every little tiny shitty
or that there
thing
isn't an emotional cost associated with that.
Yeah, exactly.
That it may be easier for them to just let you run over than to constantly bring up yet again the same fucking thing about you being an asshole over and over.
Right, and so these difficulties.
Because people don't take that well when you tell them they're an asshole.
Right,
they punish you back for it.
Right, and even just bringing up, it's like. So there's always this balance going on of how do I mention this little thing and this little thing, because those little things all add up.
To resentment.
Right. And so do I mention all of those? Because mentioning them constantly is you being a fucking dickhead. It's you not allowing the other person to be
overly critical.
You're being overly critical. So, but then again, if you don't bring them up, how do they know what it is that's shitting on you? Well, the only real answer is to have a buffer. The only real answer is to recognize that you've got to occasionally say something about little things that bother you, but for the most part, you've got to be able to let little things go, and they've got to do that exact same thing. They've got to be able to be patient, to allow a level of letting shit go, and then also recognize that you may, because you don't recognize what shitty things you're doing, you may be constantly pushing someone's line and taking advantage of their buffer. You may be eating up the buffer that they create. You may be that fucker in traffic that pulls into that tiny, tiny little fucking space that keeps you safe from ramming people in the back, and that fucking piece of shit pulls right into that tiny space that you created as a buffer. You may be that person. So the understanding that that you may be,
but it's okay. You can change.
Exactly. You can recognize it. And you can change, and you can. And well, sometimes you're gonna do it accidentally. And understanding that you are not flawless and cannot be flawless because things are constantly changing. Because there's too many little exceptional circumstances that you just have to work based on buffers. That you have.
Yeah,
to
we don't live in a
buffers.
vacuum. There's things around us influencing stuff.
So you have to keep buffers between people to have any kind of real relationship. You can't be catching them at every little fucking thing, and you also. If you're not catching them at every little thing, you have to recognize they're not going to know every little thing that they're doing, and so there has to be this occasional corrective process, and you have to recognize you are doing that same thing. You are eating up buffers that you don't recognize are buffers, and that you are. It's these things. I don't know. They seem like they're obvious, but somehow we never seem to get to them. That you have to keep buffers between things. And human beings need these buffers of patience with each other.
For sure. It's like, bumper cars have that rubber around them for a reason. Like, you should be able to allow for a little bit of bumping, but also if somebody just keeps ramming into you when you're not doing anything, you're like, hey, yo, what's up? Yeah. Like, what's going on here?
Okay, you did this a bunch of times now. I'm going to let you know. And then if you keep doing it, then I'm going to be pissed.
Exactly. So number 5, back to our list, changing things slightly, but this is also something that we've talked about, which is some people go on a detective-like search for things that their partner does wrong, maybe because they want some ammo for the next fight or whatever, but telling your mate what they're doing right can actually prevent that imaginary fight that you're preparing for in the first place. And I mean, there's a perfect example of something we were talking about earlier with resentment and thankfulness and things like that. Sometimes a partner may feel like, well, I'm doing all this housework because they're not recognizing the burden of the other person going out into the world and making money or whatever it is they're doing and the burdens that they have. They only focus on their own burdens and they're like, well, I was tired and I was whatever and I had to go get you that plate of food and, I took from myself to give to you. And the other person says, and I really appreciate that. Man, that just takes away all resentment instantly. It's like...
You're using a very specific instance.
Okay, it wasn't a plate of food, it was a cup of tea, but yes. I'm using an instance from last night where I was feeling like, like, I'm doing so much and I was going to go to sleep and you asked me to get tea and you go get it yourself and all this shitty stuff that doesn't make a person feel loved. Because when you do things for each other, that makes them feel cared for and loved. But sometimes you may feel like I do it too much. Emotional labor. So we're bringing that up in general, just saying, hey, I'm feeling kind of an appreciator, or like, hey, I'm doing this for you. And the other person's like, yes, I see you. And I'm thankful for it. Oh my God, magic. Like that weird, bad feeling is instantly gone. And the other person barely did anything. So all of it is very much tied to communication and tied to not falling prey to ideas of the other person you have in your head versus what they're actually like. Because you may forget the fact that they are actually thankful. You may choose to forget it and remember only your own bad feelings and not those times when the other person invalidated all those feelings. So a way to do that is to say that you're thankful for each other, or, just tell them things that you like that they do. And that all works. That works really well.
Always respond with negativity. Respond to negativity with negativity. And this is something that I think that this is a difficulty that where guys actually are pretty good at, and that women are actually bad at because of the difference in empathy and mirror neurons. And that is...
And what they can get away with. What guys get their ass beat for versus...
Yeah, that's true. Men can't get away with as much bullshit. Yeah. But my point is here is that there's a time to empathize with a person, and,
I see.
think, and a time to not follow their emotions.
Oh, right.
And like, for instance, you were feeling shitty, and you were kind of shitty about it.
Oh, absolutely.
And you were not nice about saying
Not
that you felt unappreciative.
Not in the slightest.
You were being shitty about that you didn't feel appreciated. And instead of going with you and being like, oh, well, fuck you.
I do all this, and
right.
this.
I was just like, and I really appreciate it. And
you killed me with kindness.
Exactly. And so the thing is, in general, it is literally more difficult for a person who has more of the typical type of empathy that is associated with a more feminine mind. And this is literally, this is neuroscience, brain structure.
Mirror neurons, man.
Women have more mirror neurons, so therefore your emotional state
they mirror it.
They will feel the same.
They will get dropped off into it, which is why hover hand is so cringy.
Exactly. So
if you feel uncertain, they feel uncertain.
So they will feel it's more difficult for them to break out of what you're feeling than it is for you to break out of their feeling if you're a man. And that is, so therefore there is kind of a responsibility of the person who has
more emotional control.
More emotional control, right? To bring things up instead of allow them to always go down. Now that doesn't mean you should always put up with bullshit. I don't. I don't always respond nicely to her being shitty. But many times that is the better route. That is the appropriate route. If you can recognize, like, oh, the reason they're feeling shitty is because they feel bad. The reason they're acting shitty is because they feel bad, and it's just they're responding.
Well, however justified or not they may be.
Right.
I think it's about 10 to 1. You forgive 10 shitty things, and then 11th you're like, all right.
But the point is that when you have a more feminine mind, when somebody starts being shitty or feeling shitty, like you may have, if you're in a relationship, you may have experienced where a woman really dislikes when you're starting to get angry at somebody else. It has nothing to do with them at all. And they start getting upset because you're angry at someone else.
Because you're yelling at me. I'm the only person here and you're yelling. No,
the point is that they are experiencing the adrenaline. They are experiencing the feelings that they find to be unpleasant, and are perhaps not as protected by anger from the fear that goes along with those adrenaline-like feelings.
Not at all.
And so, and whereas a man may be more protected by anger, and then in that kind of situation, and so that would be why they would be like, what you would think is irrational. It's like, that's irrational. I'm not mad at you. Why are you now getting upset? What's going on? This makes no sense. Well, it makes sense because they have more mirror neurons. They are more likely to empathize with another individual, and that kind of empathy is that they sometimes cannot help but feel the feeling another person is feeling.
They get dropped off into your
something
feelings.
Extremely close to it. And so understanding that actually is important for men. It's something that a lot of men do not recognize, do not understand, and is just a complete mystery to them. And it makes perfect sense from a neuroscience perspective. Of course, they're going to they're not going to want to necessarily feel the same feelings you are. And that, by the way, is, like she was saying, that's why girls hate hover hand. That's why girls a lot of times react very badly to men who are timid, because they don't want to feel timid. That is an unpleasant feeling.
It's a fearful state.
It's a fearful, unpleasant, sort of state, and they can immediatally, if they sense it, and they usually are extremely good at sensing it, and it's because of lots of subtle things that human beings who have more social, their brain is more specialized to social things. So there's things like body language. There's literally even tones of voice,
gait, tone of voice,
so many little
position
things.
Of your head,
right?
How high you're holding a position of your back, just everything.
Yeah, a million little things that add up to a pattern that human beings have developed to be able to do a sort of emotional mind reading that men can see as almost magical. So a lot of guys who are very bad at that would think that seems to be like magic. That's like, that doesn't even make sense. How could you do that? That's, because they think of it as in trying to do it consciously. They think as like, well, if I calculate the curvature of your back plus that, who could do that calculation? Nobody could.
Your subconscious.
It's like, no, your subconscious mind that was developed over millions of years to pick up social cues can do that kind of thing. And women typically are better at that sort of subtle emotional mind reading sort of task, and because it kind of goes with the mirror neuron thing that men have fewer of. So anyway, so it's just understanding that sometimes it is a man's responsibility
to frame control.
To frame control up.
Yes.
And to not allow, and unfortunately, a lot of times women are taught to get mad at men for their ability and proclivity to bring things up. And you can't allow, that is a cultural, shitty, stupid thing. That where they'll say, you're just unemotional, and here you are laughing about things, and they'll try to bring you down into the fight mode, into the shit mode, into the everything's bad mode.
But you have to be the rock against which the wave crashes.
Yeah, exactly. And so sometimes
that's the only way to calm it down.
And that will annoy them, and they'll continue to beat at it because they're frustrated.
And so you can separate. You just be like, let's do a little timeout.
Right, exactly. It's like, okay, well, you don't want to be in a happy place, and I do, so I'm going to go over here.
You have no idea how fucking potent that is.
Yeah.
For a woman to be put in timeout. Alone or
well, you don't have to say it's time.
No, but I mean, just
make it worse.
Well, of course, but I mean, just in general, to not want to be part of her environment and to leave her alone with her thoughts to calm down. That can be massively important.
It is sometimes there is a line here where basically you're trivializing a complaint.
True.
And sometimes it's valid to trivialize the complaint. So sometimes instead of breaking out back down into their negative emotional feeling, you should instead explain why it is that you do not feel that it is something that is important. And then you can make
concrete examples.
So if like say there's a situation where the guy is still laughing and the woman is going, well, fuck you. This is and she's continuing to be upset, and I can't believe you're still laughing about that. And there's a situation where she's right that you shouldn't be trivializing her feelings about this because it is important to her. She did feel bad about it, but maybe there's a reason why that was really her lack of emotional control and something that she didn't really need to do, and there's no reason for her to be feeling bad, and that may be true also. And these things can both be true, that she did feel something bad, that she did have a bad experience, and that she does want you to know about it, and she thinks that you're responsible, and you need to tell her, look, I'm actually not responsible. I am willing to help you. I am willing to help you not have that bad feeling, but only if you're willing to listen to my reason why I feel like this is not trivial, and for you to go along with me, that this is not important, that we don't have to feel bad about that. And so that's one of the things that is kind of a responsibility of whoever it is. And I mean, maybe the other way around, because there are men who are more emotionally volatile.
Gender's between your ears, it's not between your legs.
Yeah, and women who are more emotionally stable. In which case, whoever it is that is the more emotionally stable of the people, it really kind of is their responsibility to try to keep things at least
to be an adult.
To keep things at least neutral as things start to emotionally degrade. And unfortunately, society has deemed that to be a bad behavior. It is not. It is a good behavior. Society has basically said through a million sitcoms, etc., that it's always trivialization, that there's no reason you should ever trivialize someone else's feelings. That is not true. Children tantrum, you trivialize their feelings. People
even
get
better
scared
than that.
when there's nothing to be scared of, and you trivialize their feelings. And the truth of the matter is, if a person panics in a situation where it is life and death, that panic will kill them. And if you do not, if you succumb to that panic,
their panic,
and if you trivialize that panic, they may begin to think rationally, and you can save their life. But if you always get caught up in their panic, you always get caught up in the emotions of others, you will instead also panic as well, and you will both die. And that is the thing. That is where that emotional stability is a crucial part of a group of people. But that emotional stability sometimes is an ignorance of. Is because a lot of times I believe what is going on is there actually are more men have more mu opioids present at all times. They are literally a little more numb. And their endogenous opioid system is a little more active. And because of that, they are numb to things that actually do hurt other people. And just because it doesn't hurt them, they don't recognize that it is hurtful to others. And not recognizing that is a problem.
Not like a mirror neuron, though.
Right. And not recognizing that they are experiencing something painful is a problem. And being able to recognize, okay, so sometimes
that
just
it
because
literally feels more painful to other people.
Right. And understanding other people will have a different experience, that sometimes that lack of empathy that's a male problem.
It's a handicap sometimes.
Yes, men have that handicap a lot of times. A huge portion
sometimes
of time,
it's a handicap.
Especially young men.
Yeah, they all have it, but it's not always a handicap.
Yeah, but the point is that there's a reason it exists and there's a value to it, but there's also negatives that come with it as well. That's just how reality works. There's always, you can be a world-class heavy lifter and then you can no longer be a marathon runner, or you can be a marathon runner and be world-class marathon runner, and you can't be a world-class heavy lifter. You can't do both. And so that just understanding that you always are, the way you may be good at something and that makes you bad at something else, and that's just reality, and you have to accept that and try to work around it by recognizing it and planning for it, and understanding that you can value your strengths without playing down your weaknesses or not recognizing them. And so there is a weakness in guys when it comes to not really being able to understand other minds very well, and not being able to recognize that
what's the big deal,
that's stupid. It's like, well, no, it's not stupid, because they literally have a different experience than you. They literally can experience a painful moment, and the only way I can describe this to men who are more and I think all men really need to have this described to them, and that is that when you are a less emotional guy, the only thing that you can really understand to compare it to is that 1 or 2 times in your life that you cried in public, and that is the inability to control overwhelming emotion. And that is, and I mean, especially as an adult, there's like a lot of guys that to have a single welling up of fucking tear
moisture.
At all, of moisture in where other people might have seen it is just this horrible thing, and they're doing everything in their power to stop it, yet they cannot. And understanding
that's making me cry.
Right.
To have that kind of pressure on a person, Jesus Christ.
Yeah. Well, the point is that being able to understand.
So that emotional control, huh?
that level of an ocean of emotion crushing the defenses, happening on a daily basis about lots of things, and it being emotional pain in many cases that this person is experiencing, is something that men don't really usually grasp. That's not something that is part of their experience as a conscious being in their entire life. They don't understand what that could possibly be like. They don't understand the idea of having that level of, and it's not a lack of control. Urgency. It's not a lack of control. It is the potency of the emotions that are overcoming control, and being able to see it in that kind of perspective is something that most men don't really grasp.
Exactly. It's not lack of self-control, it's the strength of that wave. It's the height of the emotional wave.
Right. And so being able to understand that there are people who are having a different experience, that they can literally, that you do sometimes over trivialize, and that you need to be helping them slowly build up what you feel is toughness. Resilience. Well, a lot of your toughness and resilience is a neurochemical balance. It's a fucking advantage that you had from birth that you did nothing for. And so recognizing that.
It's a benefit of testosterone. That's it.
You're just fucking numb. It's like.
So you can go and work out with your partner and help them build up some testosterone.
Exactly. Well, not just that. Also, one of the things that happens is you can increase a person's mu-opioid sensitivity through exercise. So literally, girls who work out more are going to be less emotionally volatile.
That's badass.
Yeah, they're going to have, because basically the mu-opioid system is more sensitive, so therefore you're capable of withstanding more emotional pain as well as more physical pain. Those things both go together.
Well, that's part of working out too. You're actually training yourself to withstand pain, so exactly. I'm sure that works.
So embracing pain and actually can make someone more emotionally stable. But anyway, that's I think that was enough about that.
That was awesome. All right, number 6. Never blame, shame, or complain. Don't fully agree with that blurb, but the way Dr. Goldsmith, phrases it is that it's easy to point fingers and voice your disappointment, but before you do, ask yourself if it'll make things better. A much more effective approach is to tell your mate you would really like for him or her to do something in particular or in a different way, and give some solid examples, but try to do it in a nice way. So basically, sort of what we're talking about, a continuation of maintain level frame. And when you're telling somebody about something you'd like for them to do differently, you can give concrete examples. That way it's not you just being some emotional, that way it's not so emotional. That way they can...
It's not an attack. And one of the things that you can do is also whenever, if you can present things in humility, that is the best way to do things. Now, not everyone responds well to that, which is the best procedure. They don't respond well to the humility. It's like, yes, I've done some of these negative things, and so I'm asking you to not do the same things. But even though I do understand how you got there, that is always the best way to criticize. By self-criticism as well, and recognizing your own fallibility in that criticism. But that's not always possible. It's just that is the best way.
Yeah. Yep, and we're talking about strategies of having a satisfying, long-lasting relationship. So it's not just staying together; it's also being satisfied with each other. And so, of course, we're going to look at most effective psychological tricks and tips, but they're not necessarily going to be the easiest, and they're not necessarily going to be accessible to be done with every single person out there. Some people are much more receptive to logic, or some people are much more interested or invested in improving, and that's one of the things you can quickly figure out. Is the other person invested in the relationship, or are they not, by trying to do some of these things together?
And unfortunately, one of the other big problems that people deal with in relationships is if you see yourself as the set thing, that means you believe you can't change. If you believe you can't change, you can't. And if you or your partner sees yourself as this one solid thing that doesn't change, that is just made this way, etc., then there's not much hope that you'll ever be able to find a compromise, because you're not the kind who believes you can change. So therefore you don't attempt to change because you think it's futile. And if you're not willing to give the try to change, then you're not really relationship material. I mean, that's what it comes down to. If you see yourself as set, instead of seeing the potential in yourself and the potential in others, and seeing yourself as the thing you want to be that is currently in process, now that's a person who can adapt. That's a person who can change. That's a person who is constantly striving, that regardless of failures, that they get back up and keep trying again.
And that's somebody who can synchronize with another person to form one unit, aka a happy relationship. But if you can't do that, well, you may just be single for life, and that's cool. That doesn't affect you.
Apparently not.
Apparently not.
Some people are like, yeah, like me. I'm good.
Yep. So refer to the first, the second hour of this broadcast.
Yes.
Refer to the part where you can hear us in the beginning of this broadcast, and that's when we talk about this. All right, number 7, to have a happy, long-lasting relationship is leave love notes, which I gotta do more of. And so Dr. Goldsmith says, when I reach into my pocket and find a piece of paper that says love you, it brightens my day and I feel better about my life. So reminding your partner of your unwavering affection is a powerful tool. And you can do that through text messages or little notes, or just in general little reminders that specifically saying I love you actually is very important, I think. Yeah. All right, number 8, cuddle often, and that's a big one. Oxytocin, bonding, huge. Touch each other, which women,
so much touch.
Women get a little weird about that, because any amount of lack of clothing plus touch to her is like, oh my God, he's going to want to stick his dick in me, and I'm using it as a control mechanism, so I'm not going to let him. Stress, problems, might as well stay clothed and not touch each other, so I don't have to deal with that. So that's a big, big roadblock, I think, that we got to get over somehow.
Yeah. So getting over that's going to be difficult, because any normal woman is not going to recognize that thousands of years of evolution. I mean, thousands of years of culture and millions of years of evolution have made it where sex is a resource that primates use as a control mechanism, and so they're not going to recognize that at all. That's just getting to that point with any normal woman is almost, it's just basically that. Yeah, you might as well just forget about it. So the only other
we got some alternatives,
right? So the alternative would be that Oh, well, one of the alternatives would specifically be making sure that a woman can feel safe. That moving this around, please stop moving it.
I'm putting the
I know, but what you're doing is also making tons of noise that you don't know is being made.
I know it's being made. I just don't think it's that loud.
I think it is. Anyway, so the the.
Oh, fun. So, stream complete. Oh, now it's back. Perfect. We're good. I just had a weird disconnection.
Oh. Well, that's odd.
Stream resumed.
Okay, what were we saying?
We're good. There are some alternatives that Dr. Goldsmith mentions, and of course we have our own.
Yeah, and well, one of the things is to make sure that there are times when that a woman will feel safe that you're not going to ask for sex at all whatsoever. So basically creating some period of time in which you can definitely never, ever, ever violate the interest in sex thing. In other words, where she has absolute, perfect, 100% pure confidence that there will be absolutely
Safety.
no sexuality, because that's something that is such a high stress, high value, basically women are typically they're just going to use it as a commodity, and so therefore they're it's a limited commodity that they've got to manage the how many diamonds they put out, otherwise they don't become valuable, and they're not aware of any of this because it's too deep in instincts, and nobody's going to admit it, and it's just our culture maybe 200 years from now might eventually recognize that, but it's not. Just don't expect any woman to recognize that. It's just not going to happen. So instead,
just easier to.
You're right. So it's easier instead to just.
What will make things better?
Make
Doing
things
this other thing.
right. Do a workaround, and that is making sure that there is a time that that there is safety from that stress. Perfect safety, 100%, never ever violated, and that there is a time that you can do this on a regular basis, and that is to be able to just experience each other's touch and comfort and bonding on that level alone, and you've got to make sure that you are the one controlling the sexuality, because if they are the ones who initiate, they'll still end up blaming it on you after the fact, because the pressure that they'll feel that it might become sexual again another time, even if they initiate, because they feel like you've got to, it's something that has to be an absolute no sex zone. That's the only way you're going to be able to make sure that this is a common occurrence that you're capable of bonding on a regular basis. And like I said, just because they initiate doesn't mean that makes it okay, and you're still going to be blamed for it. And so you've got to, and they're not even going to think of it as blaming. They're just simply going to have a feeling that in the future that this might deteriorate into sex. So it's like it's just, there has to be a sex-free touching zone, because being able to touch, massage, and basically get oxytocin going is such a crucial part of a relationship that you've got to go to extraordinary ends to make sure that remains alive.
And we actually have some examples of that here
by Dr. Goldsmith, such as going to bed together, so just going to sleep at the same time. Holding hands, that's a good non-sexual one. Snuggling on the sofa while watching movies, perfect. Especially if it's, Schindler's List. It's not, it's not a sexual environment. Are just a few ways. These are just a few ways that you can physically connect. For instance, there's some little things like going to bed together sometimes is an issue, or if your partner wants to go to bed early, you can cuddle with them until they fall asleep, and then go do your own thing. So just little ways in which, you can remain fully clothed, but still cuddle, or have designated massage times or something.
Exactly. It's, if you can cuddle and be naked and be able to have physical touch, but not to become sexual, that's even more valuable, because there is I don't think that in any way,
just a body hug while naked,
right?
Just
that's really difficult for a guy who has a woman who's not constantly sexual like you are. You don't understand how difficult that is. Like, in other words, our situation is not what 99.95% of people are going to ever experience in our life.
Well, yeah, but that doesn't mean you can't cuddle naked.
for a guy, that's going to be extremely difficult. He's going to immediately get hard.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because he's sex starved, because a woman is holding out on him constantly.
Shit,
that's the norm, and there's just certain things we have to accept about society that you can't plan based on super hyper exceptional people like you. That's not something that you can plan based on. You have to plan based on what is reasonable, and so therefore the point is that you have to. There has to be a way in which you can suppress the sexuality and still be able to interact in a skin touching form, and that if you can do something like that, that would be extremely valuable. It may not be feasible, but it is something that is very valuable, because even just cuddling, etc. Sometimes it's difficult to cuddle on a couch or get somebody to cuddle, and it's like if you can. Probably the better thing is to implement massaging. In other words, massaging each other, having a timer, and just as a ritual that you each do for each other every night. And it's like, and then that time is sacred, and you're both basically, and the whole point is touching for the sake of touching. And there can be some level of nudity involved there as well, so that there is skin to skin touch, because that is really important. I mean, the things we're talking about touch, you can change an infant's immune response.
You can change the recovery rate of people in ICU.
Yeah, there's just huge changes to skin touch, that it activates the oxytocin system, and there are massive changes that occur in a human's physiology in response to touch.
And dopamine, and there's so many things.
It's fucking huge.
Yeah.
So anyway, so yeah, that is something that you absolutely, if you want to remain a couple, being able to touch each other on a regular basis, so that you continue the flow of oxytocin, because oxytocin is a feedback loop, and that is it is constantly
chemicals.
Right, it's constantly under attack from every kind of injury of betrayal, etc., that we and deception, etc., that we experience in our daily lives from other human beings. It's constantly diminishing, but it is something that the more of the oxytocin that you have in your system, the more sensitive to it you are, and the more of it you produce. So there is basically, love is always under assault, and you have to do things to make sure that it is being replenished. You have to do something extraordinary to make sure that it is replenished.
Yeah, exactly. You got to go for some extra things that aren't found in everyday life. Because as we've mentioned in the beginning, it's not a lot of people all that happy in their relationships. So doing what everyone does in everyday life may not be the best to have a long-lasting and satisfying relationship. All right, let's go to number 9. Have dinner as a family whenever possible. So that's a good thing, I believe, when you have kids especially. There is something about dinner time that, I remember really enjoying when I was a kid. And, of course, my mom was a doctor in Eastern Europe, and that would be one of my stepdad's complaints, is that the moment we'd sit down to have dinner, she'd have 7 p.m., she'd have some person calling her asking for advice on how to do the enema right or something. So my stepdad would always be like, God damn it. Like clockwork, we sat down at dinner, there's a call. So it seems like everyone enjoyed this, or at least me and my stepdad did. Enjoyed the togetherness, and that could be valuable for kids, for each other, just in general, to know. It's sort of like the touch thing, where it's a bonding experience. Food is pretty much one of the top 5 ways in which humans bond. It's something that we do as a social thing and have for so long. Top 3.
Yeah.
So touch, and food, and sex. Well, touch and sex is the same thing. Yeah. Damn it. I guess dancing together is sex, dancing, and eating. Those are the 3 ways.
People don't do that much dancing a lot.
People don't do that much dancing anymore. You're right. It used to be a very big bonding thing, but yeah, we don't have little village festivals anymore. That no maypoles, to dance around. But yeah, so top 2. Basically. So have a family dinner whenever you can. And number 10, trust that you're with the right person. Oh, that's a good one. So Dr. Goldsmith says that when you doubt that the person you're with is right for you, you will be unable to put the kind of energy into the relationship. Even if you hit rough patches, seeing that you chose wisely will make resolving issues easier and life as a couple more enjoyable. Fully agree with that. That goes back to autonomy, I think, and other things, and also trust and faith. You decide together that you are the right people for each other, and that will help you weather through issues because you realize that, so that's why destiny and fate are useful, because you're like, we're destined to be together.
Yeah, well, once you start really seriously entertaining the idea that you're with the wrong person, then you basically it's over. Because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You don't put in, like they said, you don't put in the effort.
It's hard. It's hard to put in that effort.
Why
so
would
you
put into effort into a lost cause? It makes no sense. And regardless of how, of whatever things you might think about, it's like, well, I'll just still put in the effort. No, that's unrealistic. If you really, if you begin to convince yourself in any way that it is not worth the effort, and because it is hopeless, because you're not meant for each other, etc., then it's just not going to work. You're not going to put that effort in. It's going to be way too difficult. The only way that you put effort in is if you see a light at the end of the tunnel. If you continue to believe that there's hope, if you believe that there's hope, then you will put in the effort to achieve that hope. And that's just true of just anything. Anytime that you believe it's pointless, you stop putting effort in. And it's like it's kind of like why people become shittier a lot of times as they get older, because they start to believe that it is pointless, it is hopeless to ever interact with the other human beings. They'll always be shit. They'll always treat you like shit. They're all garbage. And so you have this, once you begin to be hopeless about it, then why would you put any effort into making sure that you treat the rest of society in any constructive fashion? You don't. You give into cynicism, you become a monster. And that's just how it happens. And so the same thing happens in relationships. Once you begin to give up, you have given up. Once you lose hope, it's already over. It's just a matter of time. And so because you're not going to put in the effort, because it requires effort to achieve and keep something beautiful. It requires effort to upkeep it. There is a constant things tend to degrade. They do. Anything that is
there's a
complex.
type of entropy that requires maintenance in relationships and our bodies.
Yeah, everything. It requires effort to be made into something beautiful. And so once you believe it can't be done, then there's no point anymore. Because you're going to make it not
because your beliefs reflect
your belief will make it degrade. Period. You will no matter how much you believe you won't, you will start to not do enough. You will not take advantages of the opportunities that would have made things better.
This is how The Secret works.
Them. Exactly. It's basically the inverse of The Secret. Giving up is the inverted secret. The secret is whatever you believe will happen. Well, I mean, that's a bullshit way of approaching it, but it does come down to an effective methodology that when you believe things are going to work out well, you end up looking
opportunities.
You look at things and that otherwise you have been like, what's the likelihood that'll happen? I'm not going to put any effort into that. Blah. Whereas the truth of the matter is the likelihood was 100%, and had you just put in enough effort,
or just even having optimism or extroversion. To be open to new experiences is something could come into your lap that you would have, turned away from before. Just by virtue of expecting good things, you'll get more good things because of the way our subconscious it informs our behavior.
Yeah.
So our beliefs inform.
So absolutely, they're totally right about that, man. You've got to see your destiny together. You've got to continue to.
You got to see your future together. Literally see it.
Yes, and you've got to continue to tell the story. Basically, as a couple. Exactly. One of the things that people tend to do is they have their life story is a legend to them. Everybody has that. And there's a value in that, right? You're the hero, and there is a value to that is good, and that you should continue to do, and you should do it if you intend to have a partner, then you both are supposed to be weaving a heroic tale together. There's supposed to be this heroic tale of this unstoppable destiny of the two of you, and you should be entertaining that as a valuable, fun thing that you do. It doesn't have to be perfectly realistic. Being perfectly realistic many times isn't realistic. Being realistic is just a stupid way of saying that you really, really, really believe in the probabilities, and therefore you really, really believe you have perfect information. It's an asinine way of going at things. Being realistic is being unrealistic. It is believing that you have perfect information. It is being, that sort of perfectionism is an arrogance. And so you've got to make sure that you know that you don't have perfect information, which is why it is valuable to continue to pursue these things that are theoretically unrealistic.
Damn straight. And on that note, we shall exit.
Yes.
And we have, for our patrons that are Challenger mode or higher, top 25 tactics of workplace bullies. So we will be reading that article with our patrons, and among many others. But it's something that I wanted to touch on, but we kind of ran over our time, and doesn't really necessarily fit with all that, because finding psychological ways and tricks and tips to have a good relationship is great, but sometimes you need to talk about the opposite, where people are abusing you and taking advantage of you. And I wanted to include this in our conversation, not so much for the workplace, but because a lot of these things end up being ways to bully your partner. These may be things that you are currently experiencing that is leading to unhappiness in your relationship. And it's important to recognize these things as bullying and abusive tactics, even though they aren't overly aggressive. So you don't recognize them as bullying because nobody's in your face taking your lunch money. But so, might as well, let's just go over it. Let's just do it.
Otherwise it'd be totally clickbait.
It is total clickbait. All right, no clickbait, not this time. But I definitely have the article on gaslighting for patrons, way in which, because it's a popular topic among some of the things that we discuss in groups where my patrons are as well. So
did we talk about gaslighting in silence and while we were muted, or after we were unmuted?
We probably talked about it in silence, but the thing about, I'm not sure. The thing about gaslighting is that a lot of times what ends up happening as we were, probably it was actually when we were live, because we did mention ways in which people delude themselves and that they remember only their perfect self. Yeah. And so, but a lot of times that is essentially how gaslighting happens. Is we have evidence that gaslighting is not about intentionally lying to another person. It's about misremembering, and
it's about being delusional.
Exactly.
It's about being delusional and spreading that delusion.
Exactly. And oftentimes it is, of course, the term gaslighting came from the play in which a male was changing lights in the lamp and doing other things to make a female feel like she's gone crazy. We have an example of that that I prefer much more, infinitely better, in Amélie, which is a great movie. It's so sweet and cute. Check out Amélie if you haven't yet. It's a French film. Came out in like 2005 or so, 2006, and it features Amélie herself. She did some little things like that to a bully, actually, to make him feel like he's losing his mind, where she changed light bulbs and doorknobs. It's a cute movie. But so in my experience or understanding of neuropsychology, it is frequently those who are a little bit more on the emotional side and a little less logical and reasonable and in touch with reality who end up doing this. So histrionic, cluster B personality disorder, histrionics and all the other ones in cluster B, they are most susceptible to gaslighting other people. And those, on average, tend to be a higher population of women that fall into cluster B disorder than men. So even though the original term of gaslighting came from a man intentionally doing it to a woman, I personally believe that nowadays we have more feminine or more emotional-minded people who aren't so in touch with their memory or reality that they end up deluding themselves, therefore deluding others, and it's not at all a conscious thing. But I do think it is slightly gendered and not in the direction that the original movie showed. And so it's interesting that you a lot of times see feminism and feminist icons talking about gaslighting, and they talk about it as something that men are intentionally doing to women. However, if you look at the research, it's always people who don't remember things or delude themselves that end up unintentionally deluding others. So anyway, but yeah, that's a bit on gaslighting, and we'll read the whole thing with patrons. But let's go back to tactics of workplace bullies, which actually relates, because a lot of these things have to do with these are behaviors that are not, as I said, obvious. So they're not a very direct, in your face, what you would call a bully, but it is still very much bullying. It's ostracization. It is isolating a person. It is making them feel unwelcome. All the same isolating behaviors that occur in a schoolyard bully situation happen in the workplace. And there's 25 most common tactics ranked from most to least popular. And this comes from the Workplace Bullying Institute, which is a thing. and it's they did surveys and showed the most common tactics. So the most common number one tactic in workplace bullying, which I would also wager to say is interpersonal bullying as well, because very rarely do you have a very outwardly abusive person. That's, society kind of clamps down on super abusive people. Like, you end up having more underhanded abuse whenever it happens in relationships. So number one most common tactic workplace bullies use is making false accusations. Boy, does that sound familiar for the...
Oh God, yes. You do. Like, you have workplace bullies. Yeah.
Yeah. False accusations, and this is something that goes with the current political climate, and just this is everywhere.
Yeah, it is everywhere.
It's everywhere because it's the most common tactic of bullying people. Making false accusations. 71% of survey respondents say a bully had accused them of making errors they didn't actually make. Number two, using nonverbal intimidation, staring and glaring, because men do that. Staring and glaring are just a few ways that bullies might try to intimidate targets without saying a word. So we went from 71% for false accusations. Now we're down to 68% of individuals say a bully clearly showed their hostility with their body language. So let's cut the crap. Everybody knows body language. We all know it. We feel it. We may not be able to put it into words because, well, it's body language. But yep, number two is using nonverbal intimidation, glaring, staring, probably like turning away from a person, sighing, little things like that. The sighing is especially an issue with when you're on customer support phone calls, and the person, they're annoyed. You're asking them stuff, and you can tell a massive wave of annoyance by their tone, by the way they sigh, the way they respond to you. It's just, you can tell. But it's hard to put it into words because that's the whole point of these. They're underhanded tactics. All right, number three, dismissing an individual's thoughts or feelings. Bullies try to minimize the target's contribution or embarrass them from sharing. 64% of individuals said a bully has said something like, "Oh, that's silly," whenever someone shared their thoughts at a meeting. So public shaming, public dismissal of a contribution, specifically. Number four, using the silent treatment. Ostracism is a common tactic of bullies too. 64% of individuals say a bully used the silent treatment to cut their victim off from the group. And that's all throughout the strata of society. Number five, exhibiting mood swings. Now, I'm sure this is something that managers and leaders do. Sometimes bullies use anger to control others. 61% say a bully has used presumably uncontrollable mood swings in front of a group as a way to intimidate others. That smacks of manager. I mean, I've side experienced something like this. Where, you better not make them angry because they can't control their temper, and, so, yeah.
It's not just managers. No,
No.
People, actually, there's a tremendous amount of same level competition. In other words, where people are at the same level and they try to dominate you. And one of the ways in which they try to dominate you is through that making everything into an emotional reaction.
So they're trying to make you a subordinate even though you're equal.
even though you're equal, they attempt to make you a subordinate through basically everything that you ask them to do in cooperation on your mutual job. They act like you have asked a great deal of them, and they're, oh my God, even though they're asking the exact same things of you, and so everything becomes a huge deal. So that they establish who it is that is paying more. In other words, oh, they're paying more because they're.
But the moment you allow somebody to let their anger out on you in a workplace environment, you become the bitch immediately.
Right,
like,
but then how do you deal with that? Because the moment you
well,
respond in kind,
it's a mood swing. They can't control it.
Well, no, it's not just that. The moment you respond in kind,
you're the asshole.
You're not only are you the asshole, but you're the last person who responds. A lot of times, the only person who is seen doing it. So you're, and if they are female and you are male, you are automatically, if they are shitty towards you and then you're shitty back, you are at fault. Period. No matter what, it's over.
Yeah.
And so there is an absolute lack of There's a super hyper favoritism in that, so that women can always win that. In other words, anytime that they are shitty to you and then you're shitty back, it doesn't matter that they were shitty to you first.
You're the man. You're stronger. You shouldn't be doing this.
Yeah, it's just a cultural norm. They automatically win. They get to push you around. They get to be shitty to you because any response in kind will be met with the society destroying you. Everyone will attack you.
All right, number 6, making up random rules. A bully, especially ones in charge, may claim that certain things are against company policy, but they're not actually. It's only when it benefits them. So 61% of individuals say a bully has made up random rules that they don't even follow themselves. And this is pretty common when you, as a customer, going to some sort of business or some sort of entity and interacting with their representative, you will frequently be told that, you know, you can't do some things because they're against the rules, even though the people who are of that company do it themselves. So, and of course, within the workplace, if you have a manager or somebody who just decides to be controlling, and this is also in relationships where, you know, like, oh, we don't have money to buy this thing that you want, but we always have money to buy the thing that I want. So, you know, little things like that. All right, number 7, disregarding satisfactory work. 58% of individuals say a bully has disregarded their exemplary or satisfactory work.
A lot of these things are actually male behaviors, though. Now, this is where men are being shitty, like that being constantly dissatisfied with a person's performance. That is a very typically male thing.
Making up rules, I think, is a female.
No. There's guys that there's being very pedantic and attempting to enforce some bullshit rules that aren't even real rules and things like that. That's a very male behavior as well. Oh, these kitties are about to have at it here.
About tango.
58% said they disregarded their work despite evidence that a project meets the company's standards. A bully might say it's not good enough or doesn't meet guidelines. Yeah, if you guys are part of our Discord, which there's a link in the description, one of our kitties, Galileo, is a bit sickly, so he's extremely mean at the moment to everything, to the existence of the little hyper kitten. All right. So speaking of workplace bullies, Galileo, stop bullying the little one. All right, number 8, holding the target to a different standard. Bullies often insist that their targets aren't meeting the standards, even though they're performing the same as other employees. And this is actually something I know people who directly have had this happen to them because they've been isolated by a female manager specifically. Multiple people, many times, get their activity, even though they literally keylog the fucking achievements that they did, and you can see that they're equal to somebody else. They still get picked on as a target, and 57% say they've been harshly or constantly criticized by a bully for their performance, even though they're doing the same as everyone else, and you can measure that. Because a lot of businesses have that. They have some sort of concrete analytics of how much work has been done by a specific person. All right, number 9, spreading destructive rumors. Bullies often use gossip or spread harmful rumors to ruin the target's reputation. 56% say they've known a bully who starts or fails to stop gossip about another person. Number 10, encouraging people to turn against their target. Bullies feel more powerful when they have allies. 55% of individuals have seen in the workplace that their bullies encourage others to turn against the person who is being tormented. Number 11, singling out a target. Whether the bully moves the target's office to to the other end of the building or to the basement or takes away their stapler. The target is purposely excluded from a meeting or something like that. It's a common isolation tactic. 54% say they've seen a bully try to separate their target from the group, either socially or physically. Number 12, displaying gross, undignified, but illegal behavior. But not illegal behavior. Bullies are quite calculating in their tactics, and they know how to misbehave without actually crossing the line into illegal activity. 53% of individuals say they've seen a bully stop just short of crossing the line into illegal behavior. I bet that's related to sexual harassment or something like that.
Yeah, maybe.
Because I'm having a hard time imagining that. Or it's kind of like, I'm not touching you. It's one of those things where it's like you hover near their face, but you're not actually touching them.
There's ways in which you say, for
instance, you and a manager are in a fight that is more personal than it has anything to do with work. Then a manager can still find ways within the rules to just fuck you over, even though they really are. Not only are they not allowed to, but it's like it would be considered
discrimination, but might as well be.
But they could, in other words, it could be under just the right circumstances. It could be considered discriminatory tactics that are based on a variety of things that would not even be legal, and no less against the rules of the company. But they could just manipulate the rules to a point at which they can just get what it is they want because of their position.
Number 13, yelling and screaming to humiliate a person. Well, that's kind of an obvious one for being a bully. Bullies frequently scream or throw tantrums in public. I guess that's the difference. In public to humiliate their target.
No, that can be happening between equals. Oh,
as well. Partners.
Where they'll just flip out because something went wrong. Because say for instance, you're just stocking shelves.
Yeah.
You're stocking shelves with somebody else, and then like the thing like falls over. Something falls over and is a mess that's an inconvenience to both of you. But now the other, and it wasn't really anybody's fault. It wasn't really avoidable. And basically, this person is just a shitty person, doesn't like you, wants to find a reason to be fuckhead to you in the first place. Then what they'll do then is flip the fuck out because there was the tiniest thing that went wrong that had to do with you. Now, things go wrong that have to do with an individual all the time. That's just random events. That's what occurs. But then they'll take that as the first opportunity they have to just flip out and show everyone what a fuck up you really are. And that's why they make a big stink of it, is to try to point out, look at what a fuck up they are. See, this is why they're shitty. Whereas actually it was just a random event and they made a big deal out of it when they didn't have to.
Yeah. Number 14, stealing credit for work. Bullies are notorious for claiming exceptional work as their own. 47% say they've seen a bully insist someone else's ideas or work was their own. Yeah. I know someone like that. It's like, you give them an idea, they dismiss it by saying, oh, that's silly. And then the next day, it's their idea.
They have such a great idea.
Yep. 15, abusing the evaluation process. So this is very workplace specific. Bullies are often dishonest about their target. Okay, that's not that workplace specific. 46% of individuals say they've seen a bully lie about another person's performance during the evaluation process to attempt to sabotage their career. 16, accusing the target of being insubordinate. Bullies try to set their targets up for failure. 46% of individuals have witnessed a bully who has some power to make arbitrary rules and then accuse the target of being insubordinate. Sounds like in contempt of court kind of shit. 17, using confidential information to humiliate an individual. Whether you confided in HR that you're struggling with mental health issues or told a supervisor that you're going through a divorce, a bully might try to use that information against you. 45% say they've known a bully who's tried to humiliate a person privately or publicly based on confidential information. 18, retaliating after a complaint was filed. Oh, that's a big one. Many people resist filing a complaint against a bully because they fear retaliation. 45% of individuals say they've seen a bully retaliate against someone after they become aware that complaint was filed against them.
The issue here is that they're using the label of bully when the truth of the matter is
abuse.
Lots of people do this sort of thing, and it comes down to
it's just abuse.
Yeah, and well, it's a whether a person is willing to deal fairly or willing to try to exploit the rules to retaliate, to get revenge, to basically but a lot of people do some of these. I mean, most people do a little bit of all of this sort of thing. In other words, there is a level of when people are shitty to you, you tend to try to get back at them because they, you need to defend yourself. Because if you don't defend yourself,
you need to have some justice in the world.
Then you're well, no, not just that. If you show yourself to be a patsy in large groups, everyone will attack you. And this is something that most people kind of know. Instinctually, but they don't really necessarily realize that, straight out, consciously, that if you do not defend yourself, you will become a patsy. And so therefore there are things like this that you have to do in groups, because some motherfucker will fuck with you at some point. And if you don't engage in some sort of
retaliation is important.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes that you have to engage in this, and that doesn't make you a bully. It only makes you a bully when you're doing that kind of shit all the time. And if or
the complaint that was filed against you could be the bully.
And the way you often become a bully is because you take every little thing to heart. You do, and you try to get justice for every little offense, which is basically, that means you're constantly the aggressor, because you believe every little tiny thing is bigger than it is. You don't give people enough of a buffer to deal with you. You don't allow little mistakes and things like that. And so pretty soon, basically, you're retaliating against things that really don't deserve any kind of retaliation. So therefore, you're really actually the aggressor. And that's how people get to the point at which they are factually a habitual bully, is because they are overly sensitive, and that oversensitivity and their inflated sense of justice makes it where they're constantly getting revenge, which means they're not actually getting revenge. They're aggressors.
Yeah. This list covers the gamut from just a person to a shitty person to a bully. It kind of covers all of them, because the next one is 19, insulting someone based on gender, race, accent, language, or disability. 44% say they've heard a bully insult someone based on gender, appearance, accent, language, or disability. Yeah, okay, sure, whatever. Shitty people exist. Number 20. And this seems to be they heard a bully, so sounds like it was said in private, kind of thing, where away, not to a target's face, and not so publicly, but maybe semi-publicly, such as like in a cafeteria or something, where they're not taking great pains to not have people hear it, but they're also not so much humiliating a person in front of everyone to their face. Still shitty, but I wouldn't necessarily call that hyperbullying behavior. It's just what shitty people do. 20, assigning undesirable work as punishment. A bully boss might assign horrible work assignments to employees they dislike. 44% seen a bully do that. 21, making impossible demands. A bully is likely to give their target impossible tasks. 44% have seen that happen. 22.
Yeah, that's a really common one,
yeah.
Actually.
Oh, actually, Russian folklore stories are based on that. The story is, go there where I don't know where and get me that which I don't know what. That's like part of that was the task. That was the task for the Molodets to do.
Yeah. Oh, really? That's funny.
Yeah.
But no,
give there, I don't know where. Go there, I don't know where.
That's actually
bring me that. I don't know what.
That is the most common behavior of any high-level executive. High-level executives are always basically they credit themselves with your extraordinary achievements in your attempts to do the impossible.
To please the
It's like, and they feel like by being a perfectionist dickhead, that they have somehow created what you actually did, and that's that is the most.
By putting the pressure of an impossible demand.
That is more categorical of an executive than that behavior. That's how you become an executive, by believing by granting yourself credit for all of the work that those who did below you did when you were just being a fucking dickhead.
And giving impossible
tasks. And look at the amazing things I inspired them to do by being a shithead.
Yeah.
It's like, no, you didn't do a fucking thing. That's all. Oh, you really wanted things bad. It's like, oh God, there's nothing I hate more than that. And it's like...
This seems to be particular for software development.
No, it's managers and anybody out there that's listening that has executives. Now, it's not just manager level. It's once you go to the executive.
Because there's some jobs in which you can't really set impossible tasks that people can deliver, but in software programming, you can set something seemingly impossible and then have one or two or a group of hyper creative individuals bend over backwards through their asshole
to create something similar.
To make it,
that happens in every business. No, where basically they will.
Well, it's
somebody
true.
Who is so completely,
or have a quota, too high of a quota or something.
Out of touch with reality, they have no fucking clue how reality works.
No, I can see that.
The reason why they're executives is because they're good at manipulating people. They have no clue how reality.
Yeah, they have management People skills,
which basically are just, con men.
Manipulation. Yeah.
Right. They're good at manipulating people. So they have no clue how reality works. So that's why they ask for impossible things, not because they're purposely fucking with you, but because they want reality.
To achieve great things.
Because they want to achieve greatness, and they don't understand they're asking for two completely mutually exclusive things. So it's and then which how to be an executive is then take credit for what occurs because of your insanity, and that's that's how you be a good executive and make billions of dollars. So just in case you want to know, that's how you do it.
That's how you do it. That's the secret.
A complete piece of shit.
There you go. Capitalism 101. Secrets explained.
Well, be a con man. Basically, if you want to make money, be a con man. That's money and con go together like peas and carrots.
I mean, look at Trump.
Yeah. I wasn't gonna go there.
I did. 22. Launching a baseless campaign to oust the target. Bullies love allies, and quite often they go to great lengths to get people on their side. 43% of people say they've seen a bully launch a campaign against someone that wasn't stopped by the employer. 23. Encouraging the target to quit. Bullies often threaten to continue mistreatment unless their target quits. 43% have seen a bully do that. 24. Sabotaging an individual's contribution. A bully is likely to invest energy into sabotaging their target to a team goal. 41% of individuals have witnessed a bully try this tactic to make their target look bad, which is silly because it sabotages the whole thing. But that's how bullies do. 25. Ensuring that the target's project fails. A bully boss might go so far as to make it impossible for the target to succeed. 41% of individuals have seen a bully refuse to perform tasks like signing off on paperwork to ensure that a target would fail.
Yeah, sometimes it's and the reason why they would do that though is because they've said that that this person can't do that, or they basically there's some strategic reason why they're doing it. I mean,
right? They decided that they want somebody else for the job, or that
or that this thing should not be done, or this thing endangers their position, or it endangers what they said would happen. If they've predicted X will happen, then they need to make sure that X does happen so that their prediction is true. And so a lot of times it's amazing how much people are not aware of what they're doing when they do shit like that, though. I mean, they really don't even know that they're doing it.
Yeah, straight. And then for our patrons, we'll be talking about how to stop passing the emotional buck and gaslighting causes and roots. And you can join us right after the show by becoming a patron. Patreon.com/AnnaCherry. Challenger mode or higher. Whatever you can do, whatever you can give without hardship. Just make sure that you got your stuff taken care of, and then you can join up with our Patreon and be part of our awesome cherry popping daddies and babies. Cherry poppers gang. All right. So that's patreon.com/AnnaCherry. Highly recommend the Challenger mode. That will be the most affordable one that will still allow you to join in on our after show hangouts, and there's no nudity or anything like that. You have to hit the next hardcore mode to see nudity, so your virgin eyes will be protected if you choose Challenger mode. But of course, if you want a little more, you know where to go. And patreon.com/AnnaCherry. There will be a public free post of the audio from this podcast, as well as all of the resources that we use during the show on Patreon. So go ahead, check it out, follow it. If you don't have the means to pledge, you can still follow it and get those free episodes. So yeah, there's an RSS link in the description, and you can drop that into your favorite podcast player. We are currently working off of the RSS link alone, but one of the goals of Patreon is to afford all the lip sync fees and other things so we can have a legitimate podcast up on iTunes, Spotify, and everywhere else. That would be great. I would love for us to be on Spotify. So that's what we're working towards. And you can help us. This podcast was brought to you by patrons such as yourself and Daddy's patience. Thank you and good night. We will see you towards the end of the month. Goodbye.